Something more healthy. This meeting of the Palo Alto Unified School District comes to order. The board met in closed session and took no reportable action. Welcome back, everyone. Hi. Can we get an approval of the agenda order?
I move that we approve the agenda order.
Second. Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay. Just a little reminder, there are public speaker cards right on over here. We have one card now, and if you would like to fill one out, make sure you get that over to, is Vicki there? To Vicki, and she'll get it up to us. Right now, I just have Miss Ang Lee, and I think you want to talk during the promise, right? Okay. All right, let's get started. I think that's what we're starting with.
And can I ask, are we under the first name study session type rules?
We're under the first name retreat basis, I think, right? And I would like to welcome our new student board member, whose first name is?
My name is Ben.
From Pally. Correct. Okay, but there's only one here, right? Okay. Welcome, Ben.
Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
And can I just mention, I have asked, and Ben has accepted the charge to see if we can get a board Instagram account.
Oh, nice.
Since I think, while Dr. Austin's Twitter feed is probably good for old folks, I think the young kids are more grammar, so.
You think the old folks are on Twitter?
Actually, my parents.
It's Facebook or nothing. It's, I thought the Twitter thing was kind of the young folks, but Instagram too, sure. Okay, so we're going to get started on 4A, the PAUSD promise, and I'll let you get started, and let's remember to take the comment before we start our discussion.
Sure. A couple things. Todd, first of all, my mom follows me on Twitter and thinks that our district is doing well. So
Well, there you go.
there you go.
It's for the old folks.
She recently told me, it looks like you guys are just doing amazing, great things. I said, Mom, Twitter is not for bad news. So I had to explain that to her. Pretty funny. All right. A couple things. I want to give you just a super brief overview of the study session, and then we'll jump right into the promise. First, I'm just looking at my own notes. Note number one, what a difference a year makes. We sat here just a year ago, and we had a laundry list of topics to discuss. Very few of them were of substance. Most of those were about how we're going to interact with each other and procedures and just getting to know each other a little bit. And this year, it's mostly substance and direction. I know that there's more of a sense of calm among the team, that we had some stability this year that was not necessarily the same as it's been in a while. So we've a lot of senior management, almost everybody's back. We have the addition of Carolyn Chow, who's fit in from the second she arrived. We have more clarified roles. Derek and I have been working on an org chart, which I know there's been a question from community members for a while, and it's done. We're just making it look nicer, but it's done. And Derek and I were sitting in his office just about a week ago, and he said, this actually looks traditional and makes sense now. So progress, right? So some things are really starting to line up. We had strong kickoffs at our school district-wide and at each site. Each site also took the promise to their teachers, their staff, to go through. So while there's been some talk about, well, not everyone understands it or has seen it, they weren't supposed to. That this is when that time is starting, and our principals led and went deep. The nice thing about the promise that you'll see in a moment, we're looking specifically at our 1920 goals, and we're looking at the goals sheet with details, is that we now have identified goals, aligned actions, predetermined metrics, and clearly articulated investments in each of those. I think we have a lot of optimism, and I think there's reason for it. It's more than just hope. It's hope generated by a plan that people can read. I was with a person today who had mentioned that this is not full of jargon, and in fact, it's pretty plain speak and pretty easy to read and makes common sense. For this study session, the promise will be a discussion with very brief overviews of each section. So it's online, it's in packets, it's printed, people in the audience have it, people in front of us have it. We're not going to go line by line, there is no PowerPoint. It's a discussion with quick overviews, and in some cases, I'm going to turn it over to individual staff members. In some cases, we're going to give a 30-second overview and ask if there are questions or places that you'd like to hover. It is absolutely a discussion. Stop us at any point. That's why we have study sessions. That's the beauty of a study session. Last part. We're going to go through, and the plan is pretty clean now. There are 12 kind of power goals, areas to focus on, along with 5 core beliefs. The core beliefs, just for people who are unfamiliar with the document, are pretty easy. Students and staff members should show up every day and prepare for careers if you're a student, and participate in your career if you're an employee. So much of success starts with just showing up, and that is one of our major goals. Measuring attendance, I think in this district, the fact that attendance is not tied to funding has made it less important or monitored, and that gets completely away from the purpose of attendance, which is if you have great schools, you need to attend them to receive the benefit. Number 2, all students should be at or above grade level. If you're at a school district like Palo Alto, with few exceptions, if you're with us with some period of time, we should be able to plug holes and help people fill their gaps, and not only work with the students who come to us already prepared and skilled. Number 3, if you're going to come to a school district like Palo Alto, and we're truly going to be one of the top school districts in the state or the country, you should leave us advantaged. So whatever you want to do when you leave us, we should help you be not only prepared, but prepared at an advanced level, whether that's straight to work, gap year, college, whatever that might be. Number 4 is super important, and that is, yes? No. I got it right here. Oh, is that list written down? Yes, I'm not reading from it. Yes.
Is it written down on any of these materials?
It's the very front of the promise. It's the core beliefs now. Number 4 is success in any of these areas should not be determined on your demographics or your background. That's huge, and that's a place that we have not been overwhelmingly successful in the past, and a place where we can improve. Number 5, everyone should be able to come and experience a safe and predictable learning environment. So school safety is important. So with that being said, we'd like to get into the actual 1920 promise goals. One important.
And that doesn't mean the year 1920. That means 2019, 2020. But every time he says 1920, I think 100 years ago.
Yes, you're right.
100 years ago. I'm like, why are we looking at those plans?
Those would have been very, very different goals back in the day.
I'll get used to it. It's beginning of the season.
One last part, just framing this up before we jump in. We expect to be held accountable to these goals. It's my expectation that these will be part of my evaluation. The board will determine that. It will be part of our executive cabinet's evaluation. I get to determine that. And it will be part of our principal's evaluation as well. So these are commitments that we're going to pull all the way through. The last part before I jump in is when we measure progress in all these areas, we're going to report accurately. And we can be successful in attempts and have outcomes that are not exactly what we would have hoped for, as long as we recognize that quickly and adjust and get better and move forward. All right, we're going to start with PAUSD Promise Activity Group to build capacity for diverse pathway options for student success. And we have an exciting, very specific goal that I'd like to turn over to Ms. Ofek, or Sharon, I'm sorry, where's Sharon? There's Sharon.
I'm right here, thank you.
Sharon, to kind of frame up for us moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. So we also have Dr. Che here who can help us, or I guess Jung, who can help us with some of the more specific questions if those come up. But this goal is to build partnerships with our local community colleges and to provide opportunities for career-themed pathways that would give not only high school credit, but also some college credit. We have to establish those career-themed pathways in our high schools first, as a first step. So while we've worked on this in the past, it feels very different this time around in that we have a partnership with an organization called NAF that has a nationwide reputation for supporting successful pathway development and academies being built in multiple states. They also have a lot of connections to industry sectors so their background and their experiences are what we are gonna take their advice on and how to build out a pathway that has a sustainable trajectory. So one of the things I think people want to know is how we arrived at these two pathways that we chose for our first efforts here with them. We worked with a team of folks, most importantly, the principals at each of the high schools, and we looked at what was in place that we could build off of rather than adding something brand new in. Like, let's take what we're doing and try and build something out of what we have in place that is consistent, coherent, already has visibility with our students and is of interest to them. So that's how we arrived at both business and engineering. Engineering will be the emphasis for Pali, and business will be the emphasis for Gunn High School. And then our desire is to take what we learn at each of those schools in building those pathways and build them at the other school as well. Simultaneously, we have other things going on, but these are our focal points this year for this pathway development. And I think I'll just stop there.
Okay. Do you want to make your comment now, or do you want to wait till a certain time? Do you want to flag me down, or you'll do it now? Great. Okay, we'll just do it now. And I don't think you need a reminder, but you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, Kimberly Ang Lee, co-chair for the Palo Alto Community Advisory Committee for Special Education, member of the last year's Dyslexia Working Group. Welcome back to school. Thanks for all of your hard work. I know everyone's working hard over the summer. I wanted to comment just on a few items. We'll do the deep dive too, not the t-shirt version, not the handout version of the promise. We looked right at the details. So first off, this is just in our observations, some things to consider as you have your study session. Starting off with the activity around dyslexia. We are really thrilled that this is a K through 12 initiative. I saw that edit this week. But our concern really is around capacity, whether or not what you have been documented and the investment is sufficient capacity for equipping our teachers and for serving students. The $35,000 for professional development, we think covers what we had seen this past summer for PD. Our estimates are that we would probably need something in the order of $200,000 to $260,000. We don't have all the details, but we can talk details later. So the concern just is whether or not we are training enough teachers and whether there's enough money that you're asking for, and whether or not we will have then enough teachers to serve the number of students that we think may need help. Secondly, just as a member of the working group, whether we'd like to understand better about the really the flow and whether or not that process is really identifying what happens in evaluating students when they need to go on to Tier 3 for special education. Whether or not we really, we didn't see that in the discussion here, and we hadn't seen that in some of the documentation that came through to the working group. The other would really be then, just in the evaluation, there wasn't a call out about a psychologist, and that's obviously the professional that would take us from Tier 2 to Tier 3. So it just doesn't feel like we're addressing Tier 3 in what's here. The next item I wanted to look at was best practices. We love that, right? Let's learn from our best practices. The focus here seemed to be on elementary, because it was, the activities were for the elementary principals, and also Tier 2. So we'd like to know what's happening for secondary and Tier 3. In particular, there was no reference to co-teaching, which is something that was on the website part. For the goal book activity, I'd like to recommend that one of those intermediate outcomes be that special education students need evidence-based instruction for standards-based goals, evidence-based instruction, right? And for the goal book, which we are looking forward to, or that was that one. Okay, for operations, just very quickly, we see a request for about 30% of the investment to be around safety and operations, and another 70% of the investment then under instruction. Just basically enclose that, for what we had identified to be one of our most pivotal opportunities to move the needle around dyslexia, is only 6% of what you're asking for. So I just think it's woefully underfunded. Thank you.
Of our. Zev Werman?
Can I wait until the science item comes in?
Sure. And Vibhan? Come on up.
I'd like to thank everyone who worked on the PAUSD promise. It was a wonderful way to start the school year reading about the things. I'm especially grateful for the investment in the goal book software so that IEP goals can be aligned. And I'm really heartened, Dr. Austin, to hear that you'll be reporting the metrics transparently to the community. I look forward to that. As a parent of a special needs kid, it's really hard to set goals, and I hope this will be helpful to me and many other families. I do have one more request, which is like, while it's great to have metrics around how aligned the IEP goals are with evidence-based and standards-based curriculum, it would be really nice to see more basic metrics, like just how many special needs students do we have year over year? And then do we have enough capacity? How many full-time staff do we have? How many aides do we have? Are those numbers increasing and decreasing? Are we able to sustain the ratios we need to, or how are we doing? What's our goals? And I know this is something that everyone in the district spends a lot of time and resources on. So it would also be nice if we could start tracking some of the less desired outcomes. What fraction of our special ed students are we not able to serve in the district, and we end up having to send them out of the district? What fraction of our resources do we have to spend on legal proceedings? So hopefully those are numbers we can drive down, but again, if we have some sunshine on them, I'm sure we can work together to improve. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's it for now. When we get to science, remind me, Zev. Shall we, let's keep going with.
Can I ask a quick question? How would you like to handle our comments and input as we go at the end? What's your
I
preference?
was thinking at the end, although I know there's a lot of different ones here. I don't know, did you envision?
We can do anything you want. We're prepared to go as we go, though. I would hate for us to miss an opportunity to address something that's
Okay.
right in the front of your mind. It might distract everyone's thinking for the rest of the meeting.
Then we talked about this with the different pathways, and Sharon spoke, so let's go around and see.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's a good idea, just because I think there's a
as we
lot
go.
here and
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
can get lost.
Okay, do you want to start, Mr. Collins? Or Todd?
Todd, yeah, yes, Jennifer, thank you.
Okay.
Mostly I wanted to try to just make sure I had the nomenclature straight. So because I think this has been muddy in the past, and it's hard to have it's hard to communicate it straight unless we have a straight way of thinking about it. So at the top of our performance management hierarchy, we have some kind of goals. it was a little confusing because you referred to this as a goal. Though on this, it's referred to as an activity. And on the thing I had before, it was referred to as power goals, but I don't see that here. On the things you talked about before, which I did find on the front page of the website, is on the front page of the PAUSD process, those are referred to as values. Core beliefs, yes. Or now core beliefs. Actually, it says values, but core beliefs. Though I think, so the question is, what are our, I mean, it's hard to, you know, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So it's useful to know where we're going. So what are our, when I look at these initiatives, the question I have is, what are our goals?
So the first things you see on the front page of the website are those things that we talked about earlier last year that are unchanging over time, right? So let's use having post-secondary options as an example, because that's exactly what this ties to. So on the front page, that's number 3, and it talks about having pathways to being advantaged. This is a pathway activity that supports that never changing, unchanging. I would expect it'll be true in 2030 as much as it is right now.
I'm focused on the nomenclature. So what do we want to call those things at the top? Do we want to call them goals? Do we want to call them, it's called a core value here. You call it a core belief.
Yeah.
What do you want to call them?
We can have that conversation. I'll tell you, we've had a lot of debate about it ourselves. Personally, I think it's a core belief. What we're looking at is what's changing, what is not. In 10 years, we may not be doing this pathway work exactly as it looks.
Can I just cut you short? Because I totally agree, and I totally get that.
Yeah.
But all I want to do is get the nomenclature straight.
Gotcha.
So if we don't know what we're going to call it, we shouldn't decide it here. This is a bad body for coming up with nomenclature. But I would strongly recommend that we come up with a nomenclature and stick with it, because I think otherwise it's awfully confusing. So whatever the goals are, there need to be metrics. Because otherwise, if you don't know where you are, and then there needs to be, okay, where are we now, and how do we know if we've made the progress that we thought we said we were going to make?
Sure.
And in the promise, there is this moving the needle section, which points to the the CA dashboard student group report, which is the red, blue, yellow, orange, green thing. And talks about the the red and orange. Is it the red and orange? The red and orange parts, and said, we're going to work on the red and orange parts and try to make them not red and orange. Right. So I guess my question, and so is that so if those are the goals, is that the metric that we should focus on to figure out if we're moving in the right direction?
It depends. So as we go through here, there are places that are directly tied to exactly what you're talking about, the dashboard. There are things in here that are directly tied to the college and career indicators, which is also tied to that. There are some things that are going to go beyond that. So there is not a part of the dashboard that talks directly to post-secondary options and pathways. So for those type activities, we have identified the metrics that we're going to use to monitor our success in areas like this particular topic.
So my request would be, I think, Mr. Daubers, Ken said this before on previous, I think probably had a session like this a year or two ago. It's like the more simple, clear, and unchanging those key goals and metrics are, the better off we're going to be at communicating them to ourselves, following them, and getting the community to think about them and embrace them. So I'd really urge you to say, these are the, if these are the goals, these are the metrics that go with the goals, and whatever they are. And then initiatives can have their own metrics that say whether we did this initiative any good or not. But let's make sure we know how to measure what the goals are, and we know how to measure whether we're moving in the right direction on them or not. Which may not have been the point of this presentation, but looking at the promise and then looking at this, I had a hard time figuring out my own answers to that question, which makes it hard to evaluate. Are these the right things? I don't know, because I'm not 100% sure what the goals are or the metrics to show whether we're making the goals.
Okay.
So that's my comment. We don't have to settle this here.
Sure.
I just wanted to, that's the context. As I look at this, that's the context I have. And I just want to try to make sure I have it straight.
Got it.
Melissa?
Well, I want to say that I've been party to a few of the discussions this summer, and I know there's been a lot of iteration. And I have talked to some senior staff that seem like they've pushed on a lot of things. So I want to make sure that we're reviewing the material that was presented to us today. I think we can give feedback on this, and then we can leverage it up and make sure that it connects back to the major goals. But I do think there's some good stuff in here, and we should talk about it. I was a little confused, and I talked to the superintendent about this, why we had chosen the pathways that were chosen. Engineering, that wasn't surprising to me, but business was. And now I think this makes complete sense. BEAM at Gunn has been a very popular program, the business program at Gunn. And if this builds on top of the BEAM program, which has been very popular all the way around, then that's probably a really good thing. The one thing that's, I'm sure you're going to come back and talk to us more about this, but when I looked at the NAF website, they had an Academy for Engineering. So that was really clear. Okay, they have a pathway for engineering. But there were a bunch of other ones that weren't clearly business. Academy of Finance, that's a piece of business. Academy of Hospitality and Tourism, that's a piece of business. I'm not sure that's going to be so interesting to us here. Academy of Information Technology, you could call that business, or you could kind of move that into engineering, depending on how you looked at it. And Academy of Health Sciences, to me, when I look at districts around the country and around the state, I know that health science is an area that a lot of schools are helping their students get some background in. So I hope when you come back and talk about business for us, you tell us where you're going to invest, unless you want to do it today.
I can add a little bit more context to this. I know that it was discussed at the principals meeting, and it stems from a lot of needs. When we talked to the teachers, they felt like there's 15 industry sectors. That's how it's defined by the CDE. And the teachers that's involved with this industry sector in their program felt like the business could be one part of all of their programs. So they were hoping that we could get something off, and they could be linked to all of their courses as well.
And so when I look back at what BEAM was doing, I think it was very heavily information technology in terms of a lot of the business things they were doing there. So I don't know, maybe that's part of the pathway. I also realized that for many businesses, if we're really trying to give skill sets to kids, internships are going to make the big difference, more than anything that we learn about in the classroom.
Right, so I can speak to that. I think that that's part of the pathway development, and it's a piece that we haven't had in the past. That is a big piece that we're looking at in this current process. How do we provide opportunities for kids to have, these internships or, mentorships are different from internships, and sometimes mentorships result in internships, but how do we build a pathway that has as part of it, as a routine part of it, as a reliable part of it, some kind of internship experience for kids? And that's part of the work that we're looking at and partnering with NAFON. They have a lot of resources around development in that area.
So I think that's really good. I mean, I do know that, particularly for BEAM, that was a huge highlight.
Yeah, and also for pathways that's already more developed, such as early childhood education, which has already gone through dual enrollment. It has series of courses. Really, the next step is adding this internship portion that's certifiable. So we're adding that piece to this pathway that's already existing. And so there's different ways that we work with the NAF, and this area, working with already developed pathway and adding this internship portion and helping kids work ready as well as career ready is called fast track certification.
So I would encourage you to add a metric that measures our success with internships, whether it's putting kids in internships, whether it's making connections for internships, or whether it's completion once we have them in. I don't know what the best metric is, but I encourage you to have one.
Okay, yeah, so NAF is already providing those metrics in their portal. So our work experience coordinator teachers are required now to, not required, but they're happy to work on this portal to constantly monitor student internship and enter data into the system, so it's trackable.
So I think we can maybe do some wordsmithing on this number one metric, number of certifications offered, because that's connected to that, so.
Okay, so I
hear
look
you.
forward to hearing something on that. And then the other thing is the AAR program has been such a positive, and I know we've invested so much in it, and you've been obviously leading it. I'd like to understand how that's connected to this, how you see that going forward.
Yeah, so AAR, when I look at the demographics of AAR, it really covers a wide range. Students who just want to explore and curious about topic, to students who are doing it for 3 years, really delving deeply into their research and the research pathway. So it's a really flexible program that sometimes gets them entry into these pathways, and sometimes really they're doing it as a capstone. So that's how it's like connected to these programs. Because sometimes students does one specific project that's related to like health sciences, and they realize, okay, I want to take more biotech courses, and sometimes they discover they've done it for a year, I hate it, definitely don't want to major in it. So it's really giving that exposure and exploration for students.
So I guess my question is, if this is a major strategy for the year, we're going to continue to invest in AAR as related to these pathways as well?
Yes, and something interesting, for example, is at Poly, they like keeping AAR as very diverse, so letting students explore any topics. And then what's interesting that's happening at Gunn is it's dividing into a little bit more subject specific. So for the first year, we're having CS capstone courses that's following AAR model. So it's kind of content-specific pathway. So it's really interesting how it evolve based on the signups. So we're working together to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sean?
I just had one question. I'm very thrilled with this. As we've talked about over the last school year, dual enrollment, those types of programs that allow more diverse pathways, I think those are things that we need to be encouraging. I'm glad to see that this is an activity that we're going to be pursuing over the course of the year. One question I had is, what are we doing to sort of promote this information and make it available for the students? Because I think the flip side of just providing the pathways is also making sure students know they can avail themselves of the pathways. And a lot of things I've heard from community members is, I didn't even know we had this great thing, this partnership with Foothill. How can my student do it? I don't think it's necessarily been as well publicized to parents and students as it could have been.
Right, so when we talk about pathways, which I think sometimes gets confusing, but so we've added in the phrase career-themed pathways, because there are pieces connected to the CDE that relate to pathways, but these are pathways being developed. We have dual enrollment opportunities for kids in courses right now that we just started. Those aren't necessarily a part of a pathway yet. So those are, at the moment, really different things. And they'll continue to be different in that we'll always have some dual enrollment courses available to students that aren't connected to a pathway. But what we want is all of our pathways to have dual enrollment attached to them. So it's in progress. That's why this goal is written, and this is why we have it here, because we want to do that. And then part of this work is, how do we market that? How do we publish that? How do we make it available to kids? And, you know, the courses that kids want to take, and that was connected to how we decided these two themes to start with. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of this work.
Got it. Thank you.
And I definitely echo with you. So last year, we've been really trying to seed the thing and start this work going and building system that works for us. But I think really next step really is getting the words out. So if you can also help us, that would be great.
Sounds good.
I wanted to touch briefly on something you mentioned, Mr. Durab. There you go. Is it on now? Okay. It seems not only that if there is a...
You should just wait, you should usually wait to be called on by the presiding officer.
Okay.
Just he's a rookie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
then
don't-
that's completely understood.
No,
Then I will
I
wait.
mean,
No.
he'll probably tell you to go ahead now.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, take it. Yep, assuming, Shanika, are you done?
Yes.
Great, go ahead.
It seems not only that students don't see this as an option and don't know that it's available, but almost as if there's a negative connotation based behind it, that it's an irregular pathway, and oftentimes students are scared to introduce change into their lives, and I think we need to look into finding ways to comfort the students and ensure them that this is a strong option and a wonderful opportunity that we've are grateful to have, and that it's something students should be able to.
Yeah, you're really giving me great ideas, because last year there were a bunch of students that went through this process, and I now want to have students speak to other students about their experience of going through this pathway and dual enrollment options. Thank you for the idea.
Okay, is that it? Okay, Ken?
Well, first I want to, I appreciate the comments of Kimberly's comments about the funding for dyslexia, and given the kind of gap between what these community members think we need and what staff is presenting, I'd like to encourage you to, get together and understand where that's coming from. I think, we've talked about the leverage of these dollars, so I would like to make sure that we're expending the right amount in order to get those benefits. This is a really important program. I certainly don't want to underfund it at the beginning. On the first one, I've heard from some community members, I know others have as well, about what may be a kind of relative weakness in the area of computer science in our high schools, at least at Pali, compared to what we might expect. Is this intended to address that, or are you considering, are you taking other steps or along those lines?
Right, so we've been meeting with that group of parents in the community, and they're aware of all of this work as well. And it actually isn't just limited to computer science. Their interest is in engineering, and there's an interest at the site in developing an engineering pathway. So it all kind of happened as we went along, and so yes, the short answer is yes, and the long answer is they're apprised of this work that we're starting as well, and have actually met with us.
Okay, great. This clearly should be, I think, an area of strength given where we are in this community.
Yes.
So I'm happy to hear that that's happening. In terms of the other comments about special education metrics, I think those metrics make sense, particularly around things like, non-public placements and so forth. And so I think the only thing we want to avoid is adopting metrics without thinking through strategies. So one thing that we have talked about over the last couple of years is developing some programs internally to address some student needs that are currently being served through non-public out of district placements. So I think that would be a useful thing to at least start seriously planning this year, so that putting metrics against that kind of encourages us and supports that development. I see nodding, so I guess that's good. I'll say one more thing, actually, along the lines that Todd said. I mean, for me, the dashboard, indicators around subgroup performance on the various achievement tests are, really important. They're the sort of most visible metrics. They're the ones that the state has told us are important, and I think we agree. So I'm certainly going to be looking to those. They aren't necessarily directly reflected here. I do want to make sure that we have plans against all of those metrics. And particularly, I think there's a lot of emphasis, I think properly on elementary school that I see here. I think that there may be some need to articulate what efforts we're going to make in our secondary schools around those, addressing those subgroup performance goals.
Done. Okay. Most of my comments have already been said. I am really excited to see the engineering pathway. I think we've probably all been talking to the same people that have been waiting to see that for a while, so it's nice to see. The only other question I have is really just a curiosity question about these pathways and dual enrollment programs. I'm assuming they sort of all structured differently depending on, If you're interested in one of these, do you have to know by the beginning of your sophomore year that you're going to be in one of them? Or are some of them senior year only, or are they all the way through?
So I think senior year is a little late, but, but doesn't mean, I think we have to figure that out. I think we can come back with that answer. Because I
But they're
think that,
different.
I think they'll be different depending on the career sector and the pathway that's in place. And, you know, we've been saying pathways for a number of years, you know, and we're, a great example is like a sports medicine pathway. It came to the board, it was approved, it was implemented, it sort of died out. It's having a little bit of a revival. Like right now, it's not, I mean, we have a revival of some of it, not all of it. So what we're trying to do is, you know, create a system by which that doesn't happen again, where we have strong pathways with strong connections to our local community colleges, not just the one, but we have, for example, Mission College has a really well-known, you know, culinary program. So, and they have like a culinary space that's fantastic, industry standard. So we would partner with them, and automotive is, so there are, what did you say, 13 or 15 career sectors that are defined by the CDE. So we're trying to create, you know, a system by which these pathways get developed and are able to be sustained and maintained over time also. And it will depend on student interest, of course. Well, so those comments about how we put the information out to the community is really important. And one of them is we are a community that has a longstanding relationship with AP honors, you know, and we can develop a relationship with, you know, this idea of dual enrollment and graduating from high school with an AA degree as well, at some point, or many units towards a college education that you wouldn't have to pay for when you get to college. So there are pluses to all of these different options, and that's part of the work that we have to do in terms of helping the community understand them.
Great, that's helpful, thanks. Yep.
I just have an additional question. So and this again will apply to all the pieces, I think. So you've got metrics and investments listed here, and that's great. It's kudos to the team for both coming up with the metrics and listing them out so nicely, and for, I gather, the investment work sounds like it took somebody an all-nighter to pull it together, so that was much appreciated. On both of these, on the metrics, do you have baselines established for that of where we are today, and do you have forecasts of what you expect? You've got short, intermediate term, and long-term outcomes here. Do you have short, intermediate term, and long-term metric expectations that are written down somewhere so we can see later whether our investment and activities are yielding our expected results?
So I think that's a great question. I think we have a sense of it. I don't know that we've written it down yet. It's not very hard to go figure out how many dual enrollment courses we have now.
Can I make a recommendation then? Because my experience is that the way you described is what most people have when they start new initiatives. It's like, I have a sense of it, but I haven't written it down. And what's a really useful thing is to write it down, and then when we look at it in 6 months, when we look at it in a year, when we look at it in 2 years, that we're able to compare it to that initial expectation. And I'll tell you, in my, you know, my business experience, this comes up often. Probably 95% of the forecasts that I've ever either delivered or been on the receiving end of have not been achieved. So that's not a problem, and that's not a gotcha. That's common. But it's really useful to learn, both to see where and how you're falling short, and to recognize for individual people and individual activities, like, is this person 100%, you know, is this person usually 50% of what their forecast, or 25, or are they 80, or the rare person sandbags you and they're actually 110. But we can really learn a lot by setting out what our expectations are, writing them down, keeping that expectation, and then coming back when we review it to see how did we actually do versus what we expected. And I would appreciate it if we did that on these metrics and all the metrics that are proposed here. On the investment part, I noticed that these are investment that's nicely summarized in this last page that was added. That's great. It doesn't include the staff time allocated, which obviously is the vast majority of the expense that we have as a district and that we put into any initiative. So I'd actually urge you to reconsider that, and I'll nudge our new CFO here. Thank you, I appreciate it. Because I think, that is probably the lion's share of the investment. I mean, one of these initiatives doesn't have any investment against it. And it's like, that's not because nobody's going to spend a lot of time on it. They're probably going to spend a ton of time. And the majority of the investment on all these is probably staff time. So we're probably misleading ourselves in terms of the total investment, and maybe even the proportion of one to another, if we don't capture some estimate of the staff time, both initially and recurring. And I think that would be, I mean, if we're going to really evaluate these in terms of return on investment, we've got to have that factored in, or everybody will just say, well, but that looks really good, but there was a lot of staff time that we didn't count. Well, okay, so the answer is we should count it. So anyway, those are I don't know if you have any thoughts about any of
I'm
that.
just going to say, I think that all but one of these is probably 0 right now, so it's like, I think we're starting with, this is a relatively new effort, and our pathways are defined by the CDE as what qualifies as a pathway. So I think we can do that for this for sure, but just know, I think at this moment in time, if I had to write it down, the only one I could assign a number to would be the 3rd bullet point. So it's not like we have something tremendous in place at the moment.
Yeah, but somebody's going to, if we're going to make progress on it, somebody's going to be spending time on it.
Right,
You, obviously.
absolutely.
So it's just trying to figure out, is that 1 FTE or 10 FTEs?
Oh, yeah, I was talking about the metrics, but yeah, the FTE, yeah,
Oh, okay.
that would be consistent through all these, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think we worked through a lot of the general conversation through that first example. So let's move on.
I apologize for droning on. I won't do it every time.
Perfect. Okay, dyslexia.
So we have now gone through one of our 12, and we have 7 minutes left to go through the next 11. All right, it's not that bad. One thing I do want to share that I probably missed on the front end is when we get to our board agenda draft, each of these 12 topics is reflected in a already predetermined board agenda slot and as part of our metrics deliverable calendar. So you'll see that while Todd made some comments about some things he'd like to see when it comes to baseline, when we bring that item back, off the top of my head, I think it's in October, that'll be part of the presentation. So you'll see it more expanded, and that was with purpose that we did that.
I am going to take back my suggestion before that we go through these one at a time and suggest that maybe you present them all and then we go through them. And maybe we'll be faster if we do it that way.
Oh,
It's your meeting.
I mean, some people have already been moving ahead, but not all of us. So.
all right. Let's do this one and see if there's anything. I mean, I don't want to lose those important comments and questions. But yeah, I don't want to be here till 10 o'clock tonight either. I mean, obviously we won't be. So let's just try to be thoughtful and efficient in our time. Why don't you get going with dyslexia, which I know there's a lot of interest in, so.
Yes. Dyslexia, we've done some work around dyslexia, and I have to tell you, dyslexia is not a front burner topic of discussion in all districts. It should be,
Seems pretty silly.
but it isn't.
Right.
And I have to tell you, coming here, it was not a topic that had been discussed at this level anywhere else I'd been. So it was a learning curve for me. And when it was brought up that this could be a leverage point, it makes total sense. So we've made some good progress. A couple things before I turn this over to Ann first. I know Lana's going to tag in too. This is a phased approach. You don't go from one place to all the way to where we want to be down the road overnight. But I think there's some really nice progress here. The other thing, just in the investment sections in general, you're seeing new investments. There's a significant amount of investments in some of these categories that you're not seeing listed out because it's not new, it's ongoing. So that might help alleviate some of those concerns a little bit. But I'm going to turn it over to Ann specifically to start us off with the K through 3 screening efforts and some of our transition point screening efforts as well.
Okay, thank you. I am excited to say we are on our way with the dyslexia universal screener with all the K-3 students. So this strategy or activity will include screening every K through 3 student this year in it's called the Shaywitz is the one we're using, a baseline universal screener. Then anyone in that who is screened, who shows some indications of perhaps having dyslexia will be given a more in-depth screener. And from there, if needed, I think, there was some talk about tier 3. There is also a third level if needed, which would be a tier 3 assessment for special education in the area of dyslexia. So we have started building the capacity of the staff. We've already trained all the reading specialists and ed specialists in the screener, and we had a reading specialist meeting with the principals on August 7th, where we reviewed the Shaywitz and then did a more in-depth training on the second level dyslexia screener, the FAR, with the reading specialist. So then all the ed specialists went out to their schools and either at their first staff meeting back or within this next week, the reading specialists will be training the rest of the staff on how to give the screener. We hope to get all of those implemented by October 10th for first, second, and third kindergarten. We delay the assessment on the BAS till for further down, give them more time to get used to school, get into the reading habit of being there, and they will have it done by mid-year for kindergarten. Now, obviously, if a student comes to us and already says they have the markers of it, we're going to be doing the screener sooner. So that's just kind of where we are going right now. We are also going to be, we've been doing some training this summer. We had all the ed specialists were trained in some multisensory methods of working with children with dyslexia. We're also going to be pushing out that training in a different format, but to all gen ed teachers. So we're going to be working on it. So we're screening, we're moving forward, and we have no idea what we're going to get, how many, so we're excited to get started and get that work going.
Todd, you want to get us started?
I wore out my welcome on the last item, so I do want to say, though, that I think this is incredibly important and an incredibly high-value thing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the numbers that you generate, because I think we're generating primary data that isn't widely available about the distribution of this among our student population and what we can do about it. So I think it's great.
Melissa?
This is a huge leverage point. Don, I think if you come here a few years ago, we weren't talking about it. So I think when the law changed and sort of kicked us in the rear to talk about it, and then we realized what a big percentage of the population it probably impacts, I think the enthusiasm in certain sectors went up dramatically, and I, of course, have been one of those enthusiastic people. When this presentation with the Dyslexia Working Group came to us, one of the things they spoke about that I was quite excited about was not just the screenings K through 3, but also screening at transition points at 6th grade and 9th grade. And yet it's not in here. I'm hoping that it will be in here because a lot of times students are missed. And anyway, if we do K through 3, we still have 6th graders that were never a K through 3 for us. We also have kids that come in regularly into our district, and it seems like it would be a leverage point for us to screen them when they come in so we don't find out afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, so we will screen students as they come to us. Obviously, we're going to look through their records first. If they've come from an existing district, if there's any markers, then we will give the screener to them. And also with the 4th and 5th graders and the secondary, if we are seeing signs or there's some concern, they're having reading difficulty, the second screener can be given.
So I encourage us to actually write down our commitment to screening at those transition points. And I thought ninth grade was one of the transition points, so.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about ninth grade, but I just confirmed the process that was used for 5th to 6th grade this past summer or spring. We had all students who scored a 1 or a 2 on the ELA CASP, and along with some students who were recommended by 5th grade teachers or principals. Those students were given a reading assessment, not necessarily for dyslexia, but some of those students were working with reading specialists who were piloting one of the screeners for secondary or upper elementary. And so we do have data on some of those students, and we have someone right now who is in the process of being trained, and our expectation is that in the next about 3 weeks, which is okay, because right now kids are going through like Panther Camp or Tiger Camp or Jaguar Journey, or transitioning into their new schools. So in about 3 weeks, we'll circle back, and that person will be able to give a screener to the kids who didn't have something through that pilot. And that's that 5th to 6th grade transition. I think Lana can speak to the 9th grade piece.
Yeah, so while we're starting the process of trying to identify those kids who are already in the pipeline, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit, we're in a different place at secondary than we are at elementary, but we're trying to get there. Elementary was kind of way ahead of the game in terms of the focus we put there last year. This year, our focus is on building the capacity of the individuals to actually understand dyslexia and respond to it. So as we're going through this coming year, our ed specialists will be looking at those already in the pipeline who have reading disabilities to identify whether there are markers there that we need to assess further. So that piece is there. But there's also a really continued effort to try to identify those kids who are struggling with reading right now. Those kids will be identified and screened as we go. So there's not a universal screening process, but there is a process for looking at records and prior assessments to determine additional steps.
Well, given that, I understand this has to be a phased approach, you know, we can't jump in and have the perfect thing right away. But that makes the teacher training all the more important. And to what Kimberly said earlier, is this enough for us to try? Do we have enough money to train the teachers so that they're going to be competent in being able to tell? And if they can tell, do we have enough money to give them tools so that they know what to do?
So 2 things. First, we have internal expertise right here in our very own district, so not necessarily in need of going outside to find it. Our psychologists have been trained. They've been trained to administer the assessment. They've also been trained to train other people. So our first step was to get our tier 3 individuals trained up so that they can provide support in the initiative as well. So do we have more work to do? Yes. Do we need money to do that? Absolutely. But in terms of the phased-in process that we're taking, I think this is a good start, but it's not nearly enough to continue our efforts.
Yeah, I mean, my experience just at the secondary level is that many teachers have no idea how to support a student who has dyslexia or is struggling with reading. So anything we can do to help them in the classroom, because they don't always, the process to get a psychologist in to do an evaluation of a kid, the kid has to fail first. And if there's anything we can do to help them kind of bring the whole class along,
You're right.
so that we don't have as many kids failing, that would be very helpful.
That's it. And let me clarify, the psychologists have been trained to train general ed teachers, the entire staff, on the overview and how to recognize signs of dyslexia and how to respond, particular strategies within the classroom. So that piece is there. So the secondary will be focusing on building the capacity at that level first, while we're still trying to identify those kids who are already in the pipeline. So,
thank you.
Okay. I am going to take a community card because this person has to leave at 2:30. So Sarah Woodham, do you want to come up and make your comments now? And then we'll go on to Shaunak and Ben. So, you know, usually I do the other 4 board members and then student and then myself. Oh, it's fine. I mean, it's 2:20, right? Yeah, come on up and do it now. Right. I think I know where you're doing that.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe say a few things about the promise and also as it relates to the calendar of deliverables that you put out. So thanks. Clearly, there was a lot of work that happened over the summer while I was off on vacation and and doing all that. So thank you for that. And so it's good to come back and sort of see, I think I spent a lot of time talking about transparency and accountability and metrics. And I see, in the promise activities, metrics associated with each of the activities that I think go beyond some of the traditional ones we've had in the past. So that's good. It's sort of been raised before that I think at the secondary level, it feels lighter than at the elementary level. And I think they also, I feel like there's also like the connection between what I see in the metrics of the activities and the deliverables. Because in the deliverables, I guess what I'd like to see is that the metrics that we cover in these activities somehow get brought out in the calendar of deliverables. And it's not obvious to me that they all sort of get carried forward here. Even if you are measuring them, it's on the sites. I don't think as parents and as the public, we necessarily see what the outcomes of these activities are if I look at the deliverables. They also seem, and in particular, maybe at the secondary level, the social emotional metrics are, again, I seem light or I missed it. And I think we really need to spend a little focus there, pulling that out and understanding, especially as you go up the grades, just where the social emotional breaking points are and just fleshing that out. And that's not at all in the deliverables. Things like chick surveys. We have, we're rejiggering, I guess, the family engagement specialists. I think we should also have reports from them about what they're seeing, because they're going to be more like boots on the ground in terms of connecting with our families and their experiences, and using that potentially as a gut check against some of these other metrics that you're seeing, because those two things should not be at odds with each other, or we're not tracking something well, right? And, I think there's like analysis, because I see sort of raw metrics, or basic metrics on the activities and some reports of basic metrics. And I'm hoping that when these reports come out, there'll be analysis that speaks to, what happens at transition points, 5th to 6th, 8th to 9th. And, and with respect to sort of things like A to G eligibility, is this a retreat? Can I get 30 seconds? No.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Can you send your comments to us? Are they written down? No, okay.
They're handwritten all over the place.
Yeah.
But
But I just wanted to say, like, just like connect the dots on the base metrics to things like, red flags, yellow flags with respect to A to G and like mental health.
thank you. She really would have liked to have said that if we had let her. Okay, thanks. Shaunak.
With respect to dyslexia, I just wanted to once again echo, I think, what Mr. Dauber said and what Ms. Angley, or what Ken said and what Kimberly had said up here about capacity. And my question, I know you talked about this a little bit, but to Lana, is with dyslexia and everything else we're doing, we previously talked a little bit about things like UDL and MTSS and all this infrastructure. And I don't necessarily see that here. And my question is this part of a phased rollout, or is this something that is in here that I don't see? And do we have the money for it? And is it allocated?
Yeah. So there are obviously some embedded practices around evidence-based practices and research-based practices that all of our teachers are expected to use in good instruction. So part of this is kind of inherent in the obvious work that we try to do. What we're trying to do with the training is to make sure that people understand what those evidence-based practices are. When the superintendent talked about kind of that phase-in approach, it's starting with building the capacity first. Then we start setting those real clear expectations of what we want to see when we walk into a classroom. So there's some time and some work to do around that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Ken?
I think Melissa's making a really good point, at least as I understand it, which is that it's important to identify those students with dyslexia beyond the K through 3 and entering students. It may be that we can't do what we would like to for those students at this point, depending on when we identify them and where, but I think that it's important, it's got to be important to their teachers and to those students to know who they are, and important to us to know who they are and how many of them there are. At least my naive model of this is that universal screening kind of gets us out of the business of having to try to figure out based on clues about whether somebody is having trouble with reading. I suspect that there are some students who are pretty good at hiding the fact that they are struggling, and who would not be able to evade a screener, but can evade a teacher or counselor, or maybe even their parents. And so I really think it would make sense to invest the money in universal screening at these appropriate moments beyond K through 3. I think it'll probably energize us to continue the work at those levels. So I want to second what I think was Melissa's point.
If I may, I just want to clarify one point. There is a universal screener, K5. All students are universally screened for reading difficulties. So that's the first step. Once we identify that there is some marker of concern identified, the dyslexia screener is applied to those specific students. But for K3, they get both the universal reading screener and the universal dyslexia screener.
What about beyond 5th grade?
Yes, so once we get to the secondary level, we're again looking at records and trying to identify patterns. So there is a whole host of data that we look at. The CAS, we look at classroom grades, previous records. Those things identify whether a student may be struggling in school, and those students are, a student assistance plan meeting is held for those particular students and identified whether that student requires a screener or not.
Yeah, now I'm dangerously out over thin ice on my don't try to dictate pedagogy, but it does seem like we could do all that hard work that probably is kind of imprecise, or we could just give everybody at certain points a screener, and then we would know. But I'm probably. Yeah.
I will say you are absolutely right about that. 12,000 students is quite a challenge to do every student every single year at the marker periods where you need to do it. But definitely that is an ideal situation.
But it does sound like waiting to fail, which is kind of what we want to get away from, right?
Well, keep in mind that the first assessment is 6 to mid-year for a kindergarten. So we start assessing then, and then new students coming in, we look at records to determine whether there's a
Later
concern.
ones. It's like if you're doing pretty good, i.e. fooling everybody, we don't assess you.
And we're going to assess every year,
Yeah.
at least as, K1, 2, 3. And it's a tool for K through 3. But we're also going to be sharing, what does that look like? There's a lot of, nuances to it. Do they pick the right appropriate level books? Are they interested in book? Are they picking up a book at home? I mean, so that's kind of some of the questions for the screener. So we're going to share that with all the teachers.
I hate to bring personal stuff into this conversation, but I'm going to again, that my kid was able to hide it really well until he had a crash and burn in 7th grade. Mm-hmm. So I just think we have to keep in mind, we have really smart kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
I completely agree. I think it's the analysis at K3 is going to get most of them, and then we catch them as we go. The minute we identify there's a concern, our objective is to get in early as possible and identify.
And it's a team effort with the family and everyone, and so we're going to be listening and watching and talking, and I hope all parents will talk to their teacher if they feel there's an issue.
Okay, Ben.
Thank you. I do have one question just to clarify. Are these screens annual, or do you just get one while you're in K through 3?
So at K through 3, you receive annually. You're assessed. Once you get to the secondary level, obviously we're identifying whether you are or aren't. And usually, if you are not able to discern it by then, it's probably not there, unless you're really, really good at hiding.
Okay, and I think that there are definitely, like Mr. Darber said, students who are very, very good at hiding it, and I think that, you know, as a group, we should find the best opportunity to find those students, whether that mean screening annually at, you know, the K through 12 level, or, you know, whatever we choose to go from there. With that said, I'm really proud of the work that you all are doing. It's my first day here, but I know that you guys, I can't say it's us yet. You know, I'm really proud that we're taking a stance on it. I think it's important for our community, and I know personally students who have struggled from it, so I'm glad that we're taking a stance.
Okay, just really quickly, one, I love seeing that paraprofessionals are in here. That's obviously such an important, those are important players that interact with our kids, and if they don't know either how to diagnose it or how to support, then that's a big missed opportunity. I've noticed most people have commented on how robust it is at the elementary levels, and granted, I'm biased, but not only is that actually where we are typically teaching reading, and assumptions are that that's already done by the time you get to secondary, but I actually completely forgot my second thought. That's certainly where that work, we've been working on that for a really long time, right? And where most of the kids hopefully will be identified. So yes, we'd like to see it more robust in secondary as we go on, but I'm not surprised that we're further along in elementary than we would be with the others. For the investment, I circled it and I put cheap with an exclamation point. I was just surprised at the numbers. So granted, as a board member, I'm not interested in going and spending millions more than we have to, or that is necessary, or that's beneficial. I want us to spend our dollars wisely. But if we're finding that this is really helpful and it's really working, if there's more dollars that need to go to it, I think you have heard from the majority of the board that we are fine with that if it's needed, and if you see a benefit to it. One final question, the screener itself at K through 3, how much time does it take to screen one student?
Less than 5 minutes. Go right ahead.
It takes less than 5 minutes. In fact, one teacher who did it this spring said it was 1 minute per student. It's answering questions.
checklist
It's a
that the
checklist.
teacher does.
It's rating different questions, but they have to know the student really well.
You can't do it first day of school,
Right,
really.
you can't do it the first day of school.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Clearly, we're not on track to really get through all 12 of these. So again, I will remind my colleagues to, obviously, if you have questions that you think it's beneficial to be asking now, that the public can hear the answers to and whatnot, but certainly, you know, we always have access to ask follow-up questions later. So, next.
A question for you.
Yes.
Would you like us to go through these?
If you could chunk them, because I know there are some that are, you know, that are connected in some ways. Chunking them maybe makes sense.
Sure.
But I don't know if there's anyone that you want to skip to, because it's really important that we have, you know, staff right here to talk to or answer questions. We anticipate we've got a public comment for NGSS.
I can make a couple suggestions.
Okay,
Suggestion would be that we do not speak in depth about the next topic, which is professional learning time for our elementary principals.
okay. Important, yet probably not that much value add the board can bring right now to that.
That would be my opinion, okay? I don't know about value add, you're all amazing. If I can walk these real quick, we just identify which ones we might want to spend time on, that might help us.
Okay,
Okay, I think we should spend a little time on the IEP goals.
Yep.
That's certainly important.
we're never going to say no to that.
Right? Next gen science standards, I definitely would like to spend a minute on, and we have a card. The next one, renewal cycle, that's a short item, but it's just a highlight, and I don't know if there'll be a lot of discussion, I could be wrong. I think we can do that quickly, a minute
Okay.
or two. Disproportionate rate of referrals, that ties back to our goal of attendance and equity. I think we'll probably spend a couple minutes on that.
Okay,
Standardized student assistance program. Boy, I really think that that's one that's going to be better served in our agenda in the future, where we can really spend some time on it.
Dive into it,
And there's
okay.
no real decisions that need to be made there. Family engagement specialists, I would definitely want to spend some time on with
say it's
everybody.
a lot of interest in that.
The SEL framework, I don't think that there's a lot of new here. So I guess when we get to it, we can give you
save it
that
to the end.
quick,
Okay.
quick update. In the district office operations, the only thing I'd like to touch on there is the safety.
Okay, safety.
That will take care of our last two.
So we haven't cut down a lot, but let's dive into IEP
Cut down a couple.
and get going on IEP.
Okay.
Page 4.
Page 4.
Okay.
All right, IEP specifically, I think if we can just zero in on goal book, and you heard a couple speakers about goal book, and when I was with the Behind the Headlines today, we spoke specifically about goal book. This is a good thing for us. Let's just start there.
Yeah.
Okay? Consistency, clarity for students with IEPs so that we know exactly what we're claiming on the front end and how we're going to measure it. So I can turn this over to actually one of 3 or 4 people who would like to take this in.
You know, I like hearing that. It's like
Okay.
anyone could take that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I will
don't you
take
jump
this
on it?
one. So this Goalbook software, as you see, is going to be used, we're going to really start it off in the elementary level and hopefully move it up in the schools. But it is a software that will allow the teachers to, it helps them write Common Core aligned goals for the students with IEPs. It also makes sure that it aligns to their direct needs, and it provides some strategies and suggestions on how to help a child reach those goals in the teaching of it. So we have a training plan for the elementary special ed staff on September 7th to dig into Goal Book and get working with it. It's apparently an easy tool to use. And we are going to, as we have already been, there's case managers at each site, but there's also a person each side designated to review the IEPs before they are finished and make sure we're adding another audit piece to this to make sure that the goals are measurable, aligned to the students' needs, and are Common Core aligned. And it already happening now, but we're going to continue the quarterly audits in the special ed office to make sure that we are following all those same goals, that we are meeting those for students. There's nothing but positive things we've heard about this, so I think that is all. It costs $57,000 annually for this software, and we're really excited to get started on it.
Great. Anybody have any questions? I'm not even going to go around, just board members, student board member, any questions on that?
I just have a question about what we do once we have the goals. Is a standards-based instructional strategy the same as an evidence-based instructional strategy? So how do we make sure that we're using evidence-based strategies in the classroom?
Would you like me?
Okay. No, go ahead.
So that, for your first question, no, they're not the same. The standards that we're talking about are those that are aligned to the Common Core. So they're standards related to what's already been set by California.
Okay.
Okay. The second part of your question was, how do we ensure that the strategies are evidence-based? The great thing about Goal Book is not only do they give you support in writing the goals, they give you support in actually identifying evidence-based, research-based strategies to implement, including UDL. So it provides the UDL strategy for each particular concept or standard that you're looking for, and it provides support for teachers implementing to let them know what strategies are supposed to be implemented related to the goal.
That's good. As somebody brought up, we had a speaker that asked if we were keeping track of what percentage or what number of students we can serve with the resources we have here and what number or percentage we can't, and to keep track of that. Is that something that we are keeping track of right
Are
now?
you talking about internal, meaning non-public schools versus schools, students we actually serve here? Well, we definitely track them. We know who they are, we know where they are. And I would say that we have a higher number than average in my experience. So part of the work that we have to do is around planning. I think someone else mentioned it earlier, is identifying opportunities within the district for building programs.
Rich, and I would like to add that we have taken one of those opportunities on this year and expanded our therapeutic support class. Last year it was 3-5, and now we have a K2 as well. So we have a whole continuum. So that's one new.
Keeping the end in mind when you're working on things, it might be good for us to keep not just track of how many, but what are the categories where we aren't able to do that?
I can take that. Just off the top of my head, I think it's scheduled in December. We have a presentation on exactly that topic, options and recommendations, especially with our new director of secondary special ed with an expertise in this area.
Terrific.
Great. Okay, let's move on to NGSS. We've got a
Excellent.
card. Why don't you, whoever starts it, and then we'll.
Sharon's going to start it in just a second, but what I'll tell you, I feel good about this goal, this specific category, because it's pretty laser-like focus. Instead of a lot of places, a lot of school districts will say, well, we're going with NGSS and we're doing some things within it. We really narrowed this down and have buy-in from the teachers who are involved. So I'll turn this over to Sharon.
You first.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was just asking if I was first or our speaker was first. Just as Don shared, NGSS is, we're going to shift over. Well, NGSS is a radically different approach to teaching science than we've had in the past. So we have, we discovered an institute that is called the 5 Tools Leadership Institute, where they literally take the team that you send through what it's like to be a student learning in an environment that has NGSS-aligned instruction happening in it. And so you experience it as a student, and then they literally dissect that experience with the team and identify all the strategies that are used and how to bring it in using all of the elements of NGSS. So we sent a team of teachers. They were so excited. They came home, they left like an hour early actually, and came home in time to be able to meet with me on that exact day that the whole thing ended. And we discussed how to bring this into the high schools. So we have narrowed it down to sort of 3 phases. Over 3 years' time, where we have a leadership team who is going to, provide the training for their colleagues around what this looks like in their specific areas, biology, chemistry, physics. And then they're going to rewrite the units they teach and pilot them and then revise them and really engage in this iterative process of what it should be around, curriculum development. So I'm super excited about this goal as well, or this activity, because NGSS was adopted a long time ago. And a lot of schools across the country, in particular in high school, aren't necessarily implementing all of it in a way that it should be. And I'm excited that our team is really gonna dive in and work on that this year and then subsequent couple of years. And I'll just leave it at that.
Great. Okay. Zev Werman.
Hi, long time. Zev Werman. About NGSS, maybe I start with a sentence, a preamble. I think it's very excitingly sounding set of standards, very shallow on content. I did a review from Massachusetts. It's pretty terrible, pretty empty. A lot of words, beautiful words, zero content, or close to zero content. But anyway, that's not the point. I'm talking about this particular thing. One of the goals is common course sequence, developing common course sequence between high schools. And I wanted to provide a voice to counterbalance it. I think you want to leave some amount of flexibility between high schools. You don't want to have them perfectly aligned. We traditionally wanted to play to the strengths of the teachers, the skills, the interests, so that we did allow in the past, I don't know recently, some variety, some variance between paths. And I suggest that you consider keeping some of it. And if a student has to move from one period or two between schools, so be it. But this allows more flexibility. Now to the issue of the 5 instructional model. Actually, the superintendent mentioned in the beginning, these are easy to read, no jargon. And I can say, what the heck is 5E? Instructional thing, no jargon. What is 5E? Well, it turns out it's engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. Wonderful. Where is the L? Learning, learn. Oh, there is no learn. Which kind of goes hand in glove with NGSS, which is a lot of talk, a lot of deliberation, a lot of discussion, very little hard learning. And this brings me to the fact that 5E is very constructivist approach. And you can say, well, that's what the district decided. Every teacher will be constructivist teacher from today to tomorrow till tomorrow. Okay, you decided. However, you should know the constructivist programs tend to be less effective than more guided programs, more direct programs. Worse, those programs tend to increase the achievement gap because they rely a lot on background knowledge of students. And weak students don't have the background, strong students have, and you just increase the gap. And that's what we have been doing in Palo Alto for the last 20 years or more, so maybe we're happy with that. But that's what it will lead to. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, do any board members have any comments or questions on NGSS? Yep.
I guess I could use a primer on how NGSS is different than what we've been teaching. And I think probably today is not the time to give it, but I would like a primer.
Put that in the hopper.
The other thing is we've been talking about evidence-based grading practices, and I'd like to understand how we would incorporate that into changes that we made, since that seems to be an important strategy. But you can come back and put it all together unless you already have an answer to that.
I think I can try and attack that quickly. So the structure of the course redesign, if you will, would include the elements that also are part of an evidence-based grading course. So identifying what the common learning targets are across the year and designing instruction based on what your expected outcomes are for kids, and then evaluating and assessing based on that. So that's how it connects right back to it. It's in the structure that they create.
Okay.
Okay, good to move on? Great, okay, we're in our renewal cycle activity.
Yeah, this is Sharon's item, but I want to frame this one up real quickly. Nowhere else in this document do we have less words with a bigger impact. Okay, so I was asked a question recently. So we go as a district and we put a new course in. And that course goes for a year. And do we really evaluate it? Do we dig deep? Where does it roll over? If it rolls over, how does it roll over? Why does it roll over? If it dies, why does it die? And as we kick this around, the answer was we don't have a good evaluation system. Courses do just roll over. And then we get feedback on the back end, often word of mouth feedback and short of an actual evaluation. When we're putting in implementations or looking at what the next pilot might be, it does have a degree of randomness. And this section and the work that's being done, and I know our TOSAs have a big piece of this, is to reduce the randomness and really put some structure and system behind a process that is worthy of a system and process. So Sharon, if you have anything to add to that, feel free.
I'm not sure I have much more to add, except that I'm happy to have this as one of our goals because of all the things you just said and our experience in terms of, even how course proposals are created and generated and why and how do we track that. And it connects back to, although it was a different goal, like connection to staff costs and things like that. So I think it's really nice to try and have a system in a place where there has never really been a system in the past. And so that's the appeal there. And then also the state is really clear around K-8 adoptions. They're less clear around high school adoptions, and I think our high schools are craving that kind of a system to work within in order to have a refresh of what their courses offer, rather than it being, completely random or who got in the hopper first.
Great. Any comments from my colleagues on this item? Todd?
Yeah, I'll just comment candidly, and I'm happy to talk about it more offline. I mean, this isn't a big expense item, though it sounds like it involves ultimately a lot of people's procedures and a lot of activity. I have trouble footing this to moving the needle on student group deficiencies. This sounds like good work. It's like, eat vegetables and, exercise every day. And so I'm not necessarily saying that we shouldn't do it, but I had trouble footing this to why this is a top priority for the district, given the deficiencies that we have in a number of areas. So, we don't have to justify it. It's not, you guys have chosen it, but I don't know any other time to give that feedback, so I'll just giving it now.
I'm going to give the other side of that, and I think the long-term goal of continually and systematically analyzing and improving curriculum to challenge and better prepare students for college and career opportunities. I think that we tend to invest in things and then hope they'll get better. And if we don't have a systematic way to evaluate them, we will continue to use the precious resources we have for things that might not be the best way to serve our students. And if we can have a way to do it and look at it and say, oh, we need to improve or we need to stop doing this and do something else, I think we will end up serving our students way better. I don't know what it looks like based on this, but I would expect some annual reporting on, we reviewed 18 classes and we think half of them are what they're doing right now in the classroom makes sense, and half of them we need to make an adjustment, and maybe a couple of them we're not going to do this anymore. If we don't have this, I don't know how we reallocate resources when we need to.
Anyone else? Okay, I just like the idea, as someone who's been through many, many curricular adoptions in my career, the process of going through it, sometimes you land on continuing to use the same curriculum you were using, but you have more of a sense of what's out there. Sometimes you you keep the curriculum, but there was some really interesting new perspective on it in some other curriculum, and you incorporate that into what you're doing. So just the process of that reflection, I think makes the teachers stronger teachers, makes us clearer as a district as to why we're using what we're using. Helps, right, where we need to provide some supplements or some changes. So it's kind of like PLCs in my mind, that just the act of getting together and reflecting on something, it makes you consider what you're doing and why you're doing it, and it makes us better. So I'm supportive of this goal. I think it makes us all better at what we're doing. Shall we keep plugging away here into, I put equity HUR in our next bucket of a couple of things, I think.
Yeah. First of all, if a student is out of a classroom for a disciplinary reason, within reason, that student is not with the teacher that's there to help them progress. And we have a couple things that we want to clean up here. I'm going to turn this to Lana in just a second. Number one, we're not sure our counting system has been great when it comes to students being removed from classrooms. I'm not talking about what you would see as a classic suspension, but I think there's plenty of evidence to say that some students are removed from classrooms. It's not documented in a way that we can track the way we are going to track in the future. We worked with our principals on this particular topic over the summer, and they understand the importance, and I think there'll be a pretty easy change in practice there. We've also invested pretty heavily in this district with responsive classrooms. I was able to visit one of those trainings, and they're strong. Responsive classroom does not mean students aren't disciplined. Responsive classroom means that there are some ways that we can respond to behaviors that can keep a kid in a classroom and redirect behavior. That's a winner. I think it's a perfect alignment for our school district. But this is data that we are going to track, and we're going to track not only discipline, suspension, and general discipline data, but we're going to disaggregate it, make sure that it's not disproportionate. And we think this is a worthy goal. So Lana, I'm going to turn over to you to tag on.
Okay, I think you said it all, Don, but
Don't feel the need to repeat it.
he stole all of my thunder. But I will say, and I want to make sure that this point is made, that one of the greatest indicators of equity and inequity is our provision of both opportunity and access. And in order to have opportunity and access, our students have to have the opportunity to be in class. So that doesn't mean that we don't address our students' misbehavior and we let them get away with things. What that means is that we're identifying ways to teach students more appropriate behavior. So that we reduce the amount of recidivism, and those students who we may have previously had an issue with, we've put systems in place to reduce the chances of that child acting out or misbehaving again. So this is about, again, building capacity in staff, and to Don's point, it's extremely important for us to understand what kids are being put out of class, so that we can make sure that there's also support for the teacher, so that that teacher feels supported in their work as well. So there's two sides to this. Students will misbehave. I don't know a classroom where there is no at least one misbehaving student. However, how the teacher responds to that is critical, whether that behavior escalates as a result of the teacher's action or whether that behavior is minimized and mitigated as a result of those actions. So our job is to make sure we identify ways to mitigate. So I think this goal addresses that pretty thoroughly.
Great. Any board comment? Great. Oh,
I mean, I would say, I mean, I think this is a national issue. I mean, the disparities in discipline is just a persistent across, many, many districts. So I think this is really important work. I also think this is an area where unconscious bias is particularly liable to, manifest itself in terms of evaluation of behavior as problematic, and also in terms of the level of response. So I really think this is important work, and I appreciate the fact that we're doing it.
yep. Go ahead.
I wanted to echo what Ken said. Do we do implicit bias training for teachers and administrators?
Yes, we do.
So I wanted to suggest, I think this is the place to do it. Since the board is charged with making decisions that impact, HUR students and really have to do with the achievement gap, I think it would be helpful for the board to undergo some sort of implicit bias training too. I want to put it out there. I think that would be a very valuable thing to do since we are making the decisions that impact those across the entire district.
I love that idea, Mr. Giroux. I was just going to say I'm thrilled and kind of echo what Mr. Dauber said. This is wonderful to see. I think it's going to move the needle, if you will. Moving on, I think the next two are connected. And
The next two are connected in every way connections are formed. So I want to turn this to Lana in just a second. I really am going to ask Lana, as we talk about these next two goals of student assistance program and a kind of a rethinking of our family engagement program to really focus her comments on the restructuring, the rethinking around family engagement, why we think it's important, and a couple of the key points that we're going to be bringing to you on August 27th. Go ahead.
Thank you, Don. Just quickly about the student assistance program so everyone understands what I'm talking about. We have a system in which we analyze and address the needs of our students. What we're trying to do with this process is to make sure that the process is robust and the outcomes are what we expect them to be at every single site, so that we can expect from one site to the next that there is a process being followed consistently, so that we don't have any students who are falling through the cracks, that we are finding all of those that we need to touch base with and developing some plans around them. The second layer of the student assistance process is that every meeting comes out with some sort of plan. So it's not enough to just meet and say, yes, we've identified a problem, but not only have we identified the problem, here are some steps that we're going to take for this particular student, whether it's an evaluation, a 504 eligibility assessment, or whether it's just a regular student assistance plan where someone is overseeing and watching the progress of students and monitoring to make sure progress is being made. So that leads right into what we're really trying to do with our family engagement specialists. So let me give you some context. Right now, the way they function is more global, which means they're helping with translations, they're helping with communications, they're doing outreach to families. Where we are shifting this work is that these folks are now identified specifically by name, by family, for each individual student who needs support. So that means that that student and family engagement specialist is monitoring progress. They are looking at grades, they are looking at the DF list, they are looking at progress towards A to G graduation, A to G eligibility. So they are really getting into the data to try to identify how best to support students and their families in success. So I think we can leverage a lot. Obviously, right now, we are still building the model, so we don't have everybody in place right now. But the objective is that each student who has been identified and their family receives the support they need to success.
Yay. Any board members, comments? Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're sort of at a crisis point, and so we're moving from sort of a vitamin model, like let's help everybody know what to do, to let's go do the painkiller, let's go and put intensive resources on the students that are struggling and really in crisis. It's something we have to do short term, but I want to make sure that we also have a plan to make sure that families that seem okay right now but just are confused and don't know what to do don't hit a tipping point and we have to wait till they crash before we address them. So maybe you could just tell me how you're just general family that doesn't know what's going on.
No, thank you for saying that, because here's the challenge, and here's why it was necessary to look at kind of more people in this particular model. The old job didn't change. What we did was just tried to build in support with some additional FTEs so that we can increase the level of intensity in which each individual FES functions. So that way, there's still family outreach globally. The principal still uses the family engagement specialist in the same way. What we were not doing and what we're doing this year is we are putting names and faces to the cases. And that means that now, in addition to just that global support, we are now saying, we know this student needs more intensive support in providing that.
So if I'm a family that has the potential to have a problem, but I don't have it right now, but I don't know basic things like, what do I do when my kid needs some reading support? Or who do I go to make sure that the behavior things are happening in the classroom that might be rolling over into my kid's ability to be successful might be starting to impact me, or my kid's anxious. Who do I go to talk to get that advice on what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to, this is an important point, because from my seat, the school site is always the first point of connection. But sometimes I know that there's an additional piece that's required. So once there seems to be a disconnect or a language barrier or a cultural barrier, it's important for that school site individual to be able to recognize that and be able to funnel that particular family to an FES who can support in more of a cultural perspective.
So are we going to expect then that our families, we tell them just, if you need help, we'll know?
What we'll say is we give the information out so that everybody knows how to get it when they need it. So we're building right now, some information. It's not a website, but we're trying to improve our website so that it's easily accessible to families, so that that's their first point of contact. So the trick is going to be to make sure that we're communicating in multiple ways. That is, the school site knows how to access us, and the parent knows how to access those services as well. So information will be put out. We are right now planning a community session so that we can notify parents and inform them that the resource is available. And we're responding, quite frankly, to data we collected last year, which most people didn't necessarily know who the family engagement specialist was. So our job is going to be to advertise and to support and to make sure that our counselors are also involved in sharing that information as well.
So I think this is a good thing to deal with the crisis. I'm not sure we've nailed how to make sure that people can navigate, people that might have a harder time navigating.
can I just say that our very first board meeting on August 27th, this topic is one of the first we're going to be talking about. So we're going to have time to go in depth and for us to better understand and maybe to provide some feedback. I don't know if anyone else has any comments about this or if they can wait till the 27th.
I just have one comment, which, I mean, we're talking about this on the 27th, but this sounds like a pretty different job to me than the family engagement specialist as originally configured. I think this makes more sense. I mean, I've been saying for a couple of years that I think that helping students, do better at school and helping school do better by students, is a sort of more direct line than getting involved with family engagement. But I just wonder if if the folks who we hired to do the first job are actually well set up to do the second. We're talking about data, we're talking about, this seems like a much more sort of academically, professionally demanding role if we're going to be successful than the family engagement specialist role. Yet it looks like we're retraining those folks to do it. If I were meddling, I might say, are you sure? But I'm not going to say that. I'm taking SAR's approach.
We're pretty sure. Yeah, Ken, you're absolutely right on every part of that. And I think due to some sensitivities and some stuff we're still working out, I'd like to come back with a more thoughtful response. But it's nothing that's not on our radar.
And obviously, we'll talk more in depth about it on the 27th. I'm really excited to see this model. I think it's something that, as Ken said, we've been sort of trying to come around over the past couple of years, and to have a case manager on any kid who we feel like really needs it, not only will we'll have a chance to see if it really moves the needle, but that's also an opportunity for a ton of feedback for us for finding trends in what are the things that are making it difficult, right? Is it an attendance thing? Is it a bullying thing? Or is there an academic need that's not being met? And we might find trends there that'll help us better as you hit this global scale that we can do, we can take it away from being a one by one, situation. Okay, moving right along, I believe the last one here is safety.
There's kind of,
Yes?
there's last
Ones?
two. One I'm going to spend almost note.
You'd rather not skip a session?
Well, I have something to say about SEL and what I think is missing from that. I think I don't need to say anything else for Dr. Austin to know what.
Well, okay, why don't we, go ahead with the safety one, and then we'll come back to SEL. Let's get our safety done.
Two things. One is the standard protocols, and then I'll go to safety. The protocols, just two things I want to draw your attention to. Karen and Carolyn and I could not be more in agreement that we need to really clean up our position control as a district, and I think we have a plan to do that. That's a really, really good thing for us. That's an internal function of the operational piece.
I was just going to say, it feels kind of lingo-y to me.
Sure. Carolyn, you want to give a more specific definition of position control, or I can do it? But
And welcome to Caroline.
Oh, thank you.
Take a mic.
I think I'm going to use Todd's mic here. So position control is the function of having all of the employees in a position that is linked to the financial system. So it's the two systems working together. So when the budget reports are run, it represents everybody that is going through the payroll system. And right now we have two independent systems, and we want to move towards a model that links those two systems so that they're cohesive and talking to each other at all times.
right.
Great.
Of the three of us, none of the three have been in a place where the two systems were not the same. So that is an anomaly in school districts, and we're going to fix it. So
We've
that's
always been a little different.
different is sometimes good and sometimes not. So this will put us back on a good path. We're going to move to safety now, and all I'm going to do is frame up that Karen came to me, and we've been talking internally a lot about the importance of safety of our schools. And Karen came to me and said, I want this one. I would like to take this on. I want to own it. And I really appreciate that. And if you want to do anything successfully, find volunteers. And she was quick to put her hand up and say this is something that she believes equally strongly about, and I really appreciate that about Karen. So I'm going to turn this over to her for just a couple quick thoughts.
Thank you, Don. I'll have to say that I was inspired in this by, if you go back to 2017-18, when our students led with a really strong voice around school safety and issues of violence that are a public health crisis. And the voice of our students and the manner in which they approach this really inspired me to take a deep look. Don and I began that deep look last year in terms of looking at our current practices and looking for enhancements in our practices as we move forward. So I was able to attend some professional learning last year with very strong strands on school safety and emergency preparedness. We came back and we brought forward to the board 2 new job descriptions. One was a manager of, there's a long title, Safety, Security, and Disaster Preparedness, and that was in, I think it was in March 26th. We also had a technician position that would support that work. So what we're really looking for is elevating the designation and the allocation of resources and attention to this work. And that has already begun. So we currently have a very qualified individual on a temporary basis helping to lead this work because during the course of the summer, we wanted to be positioned to open up the school year in the strongest possible manner. So the work has begun. We're really looking at some basic components, and I can kind of delineate those to you a little bit. So one is just how do we receive information about school safety and how do we utilize it? So if there's information that is available that we can receive and act on in terms of keeping our schools safe, we want to be able to do that. We're looking at increasing visibility around our school sites, perimeters of our school sites through use of additional cameras. And we're also looking at landscaping in terms of barriers and visibility around our campuses as well. I'd also like to add that we have a really strong partnership with our local law enforcement, Palo Alto Police Department, Stanford Sheriff's Department, the offices of OES. So I've already spoken with them about really expanding that partnership and utilizing shared practices. And we're beginning to do that as we're calendaring all of our upcoming drills for this school year. So right now, the employee that we have in terms of building a temporary infrastructure is out at school sites, working with staffs, working with administration on what are these procedures going to look like for this school year. And we hope to come back to you August 27th with a request to really formalize hiring for this, because in terms of looking at an infrastructure where we can invest in school safety, that looks like the manager position that we brought forward before, as well as the technician position, which will absorb some current components of other positions as well. But we'll be coming back August 27th with some more information around that. So it's basically what we've done this far, but I say we have a really strong focus on building our practices and enhancing school safety, emergency preparedness, and security.
Great. I know this is something the community has been really interested in for a while,
Absolutely.
so I'm really glad that we'll have some reports coming up in this year for the community and for us.
Absolutely.
Community comment, or I'm sorry, board comment?
I'm really glad to see this. We had some discussions last year on this. I think it becomes more and more in the front of our minds as a community as bigger and bigger events happen closer and closer to home. For example, I think we're very hard pressed to talk about gun violence because it'll never happen here, except that it just happened in Gilroy. And we have very open campuses and all of that. So last year we talked a little bit about infrastructure, about hardening, things like that. I noticed that there is no investment for infrastructure here, it's just for people. Is there any infrastructure investments envisioned, or is that something that's more long-term, or is that already folded into the budget we already have?
So that is an excellent question, and it's actually part of our presentation on construction and bond program that's coming up on the 22nd, and that is exactly where we'll talk about that allocation.
Great, thank you.
Any other board comment?
I know, I think it's great that you're proposing this. I know we're not talking about the other operations thing, but I just would like to share that if we're going to improve our public websites, that it would be good to survey folks beyond the internal folks to see how they feel they're being communicated with, how they feel they provide information. And if there's any way to keep track of, or have some sort of metric on redundancy and cost savings by these fabulous changes in operations. You know, even when Carolyn said, oh, if we could have either both systems talking to each other or one system, well, I would assume that that would save some time and effort of trying to make sure they match all the time. That's a cost savings. If we can have a metric that keeps track of what we're trying to get rid of in redundancy and what kind of costs we're saving.
That is definitely a redundancy issue that we've identified. And I will just clarify that we are managing a type of position control now, but it's through a manual process as opposed to something that is going to be more efficient.
So immediately, if you had a metric, you would show immediate improvement once you put a system in place.
Easy. Okay, we have a public comment from Jade Chow.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jade Chow. I'm PTA Council President, and I just want to thank you, Dr. Austin and others, for working on this campus safety. It is a priority for us and on the minds of every parent in this community. We'll be following this and offering also any assistance that we can to you in terms of anything that needs to be done or needs more clarification or feedback from the community. So thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, shall we move on to SEL and answer Ken's question? Because you can anticipate it already, right?
I would like to speak about homework.
Interesting.
Yes. Ken and I had a quick talk. It's probably an example that not every single thing that we're touching is written in this particular document, and there's still maybe an opportunity to revise this to include it. Is certainly a front burner topic, the topic of homework. It's actually already positioned on our agenda for a full report. It's a metric that's on our deliverables. It is a topic of discussion and additional action at school sites. Met with one of our instructional chairs. I won't single that person out right now, and they're doing some really good work, but I don't want the absence of this document to be seen as an absence of effort or focus.
I'm happy to hear that. I mean, I'm particularly looking at the metrics. You know, what we know from challenge success surveys in our high schools is that for some students, the level of homework that they experience is a real driver, maybe the biggest driver of chronic absenteeism, and also a huge driver for well-being, probably the biggest impact on stress, along with test and project stacking. So, you know, I think working on SEL is tremendously important, but, you know, we should also work on the things that are directly affecting student well-being. So I'm happy to hear, Dr. Austin, that you're on the same page on that.
Can I just ask one quick question about the first bullet of actions talks about preparing for implementation K-12, and I know that one of the things that's been a discussion over years is that different elementary schools have different actual curricula, and I'm wondering, are we asking schools to all go to the same one, or are schools still using the ones that they, or is that not even on the table?
So I think that's something we're going to be discussing.
Okay.
You know, I think where we're going to end up, kind of the feeling right now, is that we have some core values or some standards, or what are the things children need, and it might be a variety of different curricula could get them there. So we're doing a lot, and a lot of it's really good. So we're going to look at the best of the best and figure out where to move forward from there.
Good. Okay, thank you.
May I add something?
You may.
Thank you. I think the issue that Ken is raising is not really covered under this item at all. I mean, I think this is a social emotional learning curriculum item. what Ken's talking about goes to not only student health, but also academic performance, because students can't learn if they're not healthy and engaged. And I think, again, to Ken's point, we have dropped the ball more or less completely on this the last several years, both in terms of implementing our homework policy, that's a written policy that we promised to our parents, and test and project stacking, which, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything that indicates that we've done anything meaningful on test and project stacking. I hear about it from students directly on a fairly frequent basis. You know, it's something I ask people about, and they say, yo, yeah, that's like a huge problem. And it's like, we're talking about the most important things that we're going to work on to move the needle. That's something we identified years ago as something that's incredibly important for something that we all agree is incredibly important, and it's not on the list. And while I'm sure that we're working on it and somebody's working on it in some way, somewhere, my experience is the whole reason to have lists like this is to get the people to focus on the most important things. And so these are the things that I want to hold you and the senior staff accountable for. I don't want to come back and say, oh yeah, and homework and present time, did we do anything on that? Because that seemed kind of important. So it's either on this list or it's not on this list. If we think it's really important, it should be on the list. I personally think it's really important, and it's been important for a long time, and we've just we punted on it. And so I'd like to see us not punt on it anymore.
Sharon, I'm sorry, didn't we in the spring have 2 high school teachers come and talk to us about work they were doing, alignment they were doing, results they were seeing?
We did, and we also had one earlier in the year that was middle school and high school.
If there isn't a metric and we don't see the needle move, then the fact that somebody says we did something somewhere it's helpful that they did, but it's not sufficient from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Todd on this. I do appreciate and I said it at the time, I appreciated the signs of progress, but I think there's a lot more that we can and should be doing. I think the importance of this driver is really, for all kinds of outcomes, is I think we recognize it, but we underestimate it. I think it's a hard thing to change. I think that's why we haven't changed it. But that means that we should put more effort into it. So I do want to express appreciation for the folks who are working on it, but I also do want to see it as something that really has a front and center priority.
Maybe you could take a look at the scaling up best practices area and see if it might fit in there.
What I think we can do is, and this is what a study session is, right? Is to share ideas and gather feedback. So I think this is an area that we can bring back a revision when we're done and bring this little piece of it back. It's fine.
Although I agree with Todd that I don't think that it really fits under this one that you showed us. This one seemed more like implementing curricula as opposed to general social emotional health. So perhaps elevating it, but I don't know if it fit in this one. It might be somewhere else.
I am sure that we can get back together and find the appropriate placement.
Great.
And I do wonder if, like you talked about growing good practices, because one of the things that I heard from that was that there was some changes and there was some improvement and they were seeing it. So, more of that, right? What is it that's making a difference, and how is there a way to spread it to the rest of the teachers?
I do think that the community would be very positive on us having a goal around best practices that included more than what we have right here in best practices. So you could put it in a different category, but I'm just saying I think that would be one way to deal with it.
That's great feedback.
Okay, thank you everyone for that. I think we have concluded the first one, which means we are now on to 4B, which is Cubberly.
Actually, before we do that, I'm sorry. We're being asked for an investment amount, and I wonder if you could just share with us how much of this is new money that we need to find, and how much is money you've already found and we can allocate.
Do you want that answer right now?
I don't know. Do you have that answer?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is it's a mix of things that are in the budget, some things that we can reallocate to make this happen, and some things that are brand new. And we were going to break those out for you, but Carolyn's still trying to find out where the offices are here, so we're giving her a little time, and we plan to bring that back with more detail in the future. It's a totally fair question, though.
Okay, great, because we're going to have to,
Here's what we do not expect, and I checked this with Carolyn. For the ask of 1.126, I think it is, million, we do not anticipate that we're going to have a first interim adjustment for that amount. It's going to be something different than that. So it is
Smaller than that.
smaller than that for these items.
Not just different.
That's right.
Okay.
Could I ask just a process question? Do you expect at some point, like now, say, to have a short break?
It was like you read my mind. Yes. I was going to suggest a 5-minute break and then coming back and starting in with Coverly. Does that make sense to you?
Makes sense to me.
It's like you were right there with me.
I have some.
Okay, as everyone's taking their seats again, just, okay, we're going. We're on. The next item on the agenda is Cubberly. Going to ask for everyone's attention as we jump back in here. Got a lot to cover. We've got Cubberly on the agenda, and one of the reasons why we wanted to discuss it now, no decisions being made today, but we wanted to discuss it because, as you may well be aware, the city has agendized this many times and has been very curious as to what we thought, if you will. And given our summer, and the last we had this on the agenda was when Concordia came and presented the most recent plan to us. And I think it was very well received by our board. And then we were done for the summer. So there have been a lot of things that have changed, and I don't know if they've changed, but there have been a lot of new discussions going on. And there's also the issue of the Cubberly lease, which hopefully you saw there was an amendment to our board packet with in addition in there. So we'll be talking about these two things today. And again, not any decisions, but as, and I'll turn this over to you in a second, Dr. Austin, or Dawn, as staff communicates with city staff, I think it's a lot more helpful to them to have a sense of just the pulse of the board itself and what we're thinking about in terms of, are we neighbors, are we partners, our timeline, what our interest in, and any other thoughts we have about funding or timing or whatnot. So we figured we'd agendize this just to give each of us a chance to weigh in and share our thinking a little bit. So as Don and other staff members go back to the city, they're more on the pulse of where we're at. Dr. Austin?
That's, you just summed it up perfectly. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Golden, but just before I do, or I guess today, Bob, before I do, let me tell you what I envision on the back end of this and what will help us.
That's helpful.
On the back end, Bob will be here to answer some questions. He's going to have some great history. But I'm really here to take notes on this one. I can tell you a little bit about our staff-to-staff conversations, but I've been going based on what I think I know, and it'll be our time to have our first real discussion with the entire board, and you can tell us how you feel about a few things, including the lease, and how we may start to move forward so I don't take us in a direction staff-to-staff that's inconsistent with your wishes. So I'll turn it over to Bob.
Hi, good afternoon. Let's see, I'd asked Betty if I should wear a tie, and she said that I really should. Don would appreciate it, but I didn't. And so, at any rate, that's, but the fact remains.
It's a study session.
Yes, yes.
Our board retreat's
So,
different, I don't know why.
Well, first of all, the board has taken action. The board's taken action in late February, and they approved the following three uses of Cubberly. A sufficient area to accommodate construction, if needed, of a full high school or middle school. Sufficient area to accommodate construction of staff housing. Sufficient area to accommodate the construction of a PAUSD central office to replace the functions of the present site at 25 Churchill. And we started last June with Concordia. This was a project that was jointly funded 50-50 by the school district and the city of Palo Alto. By the way, lest I forget, Kristen O'Kane, who's the Director of Community Services, is here today. And also here today is Ann Brown and Sharon Ofek, who've worked with us on this program, and also Ron Smith, who've worked with us on these conversations with Cubberly. So the fact remains that we have this direction from the board, and I have a brief slide presentation that,
we're past it.
of course, that talks about the progress to date, which is substantial. Incidentally, there's coming a draft report from Concordia, the contractor, that will totally dwarf anything that I say today and has incredible details. But the fact remains that there was a series of 4 meetings. A meeting on program needs, a meeting on program vision, a meeting on design direction, and a meeting on evaluating a draft plan. I've provided in your packet another slide that gives details on those meetings. This is an image of the Cubberley site. Included in this study of Cubberley, added on, was Greendale and 525 San Antonio, that kind of panhandle that you see there. The blue buildings, the blue structures are city structures. The purple structures are intended to be shared structures. And then the red structures are, first, this high school or middle school. Incidentally, you may ask, how much planning have you done? And the answer is, well, essentially none, because not only is it 10 years in the future, but it's either going to be a high school or a middle school or an elementary school. So we've got a lot of definiteness involved. So the fact remains, we have the square footage for a high school or a middle school, and obviously for an elementary school. We also have that rectangle on the far left, and that would be the site of the new district office. And then you have over on that far end of the panhandle the prospect of staff housing. There's a property line. The trade in the year 2002, we owned all 35 acres. However, the city owned the present Terman site. And so the trade was the 8 acres of Terman under roof, and in return, they received 8 acres of Cubberley. That line is not a, that black line is the present boundary, and the black line is jagged. Why? Because there were existing buildings on the Cubberley site, and there was no sense, obviously, cutting a building in half. So that line was structured that way. And the notion here in the future is that the trade would be made such that those blue areas that you see would go over to the city in return for that red area that would be conveyed to the school district, and so it would end up being 8 acres again. This is one plan, but the fact remains there are other plans. That's all. Obviously, that big student services, community services building, that kind of, I guess, diamond-shaped building, that 5-sided building, you don't want to cut through that building, and so that's why this is drawn this way. Again, there's no deal in place. This is simply one possibility. You have in your packet this PowerPoint that actually I won't go through. The notion of the uses of this site were an incredible conversation, subject to conversation by the city. Why? Because I guess you can call us neighbors, but this really isn't the case. That is, what we are is we're landlords. There is the city that owns 8 acres, and we're the landlords of that other 27 acres. And there are interests that, yes, I have real property in the city, and there are interests that landlords and tenants have and trade and are very interested in, well, some cases very interested in negotiating, and that's the case here. But the fact remains, we're the city's landlords. And I was trying to figure out, as in listening to the 2 hours prior to this, I wonder how much 27 acres of Palo Alto land is worth. And it's probably 200, 300, 400 million dollars, something like that. So we're landlords of this property. And incidentally, it's not going to, there's not going to be an opportunity to acquire another property like this. You have a visual called organization by user group and site coverage again, and talking about green space. And then there are 4 housing options. This is the 32-unit housing option, which has that orange kind of shaped buildings over on the far left. You have another, you'll notice another rectangular building now popped up to give 64 units. And then you have a building on the right that provides 112 units of housing. And then you have another building that brings you up to, so this has scenarios that go from 32 to 164 units. Is 164 units a lot? Well, Jefferson High School District in just south of San Francisco is building 132 units. And Jefferson High School District has an enrollment of about 5,000 students, 6,000 students. We know about San Mateo Community College District, but San Mateo High School District is intending to build about 130 units of housing as well. But these are all in the talking stage. The Jefferson units aren't. They have passed a bond, and they're moving directly forward to build their 132 units. There are other details here that I'm not going to go through. The interesting thing, let's see, Carolyn and I, whenever we see a report, whenever we see a proposal, we always go to the end. Instead of starting at the beginning, we always start at the end. Because at the end of this one, here's the phasing, but at the end of this one is the cost estimate, which is in excess of $800 million over that period of time. Part of it's the cost of the school, but the fact remains these improvements will cost a lot of money. And incidentally, as you know, I'm going to give a report next Thursday, and it is the case that the market for construction is very difficult at this time. And I've heard people say, and if you wait, it'll get better. But there are other people that say, no, it's not going to get better, and it may get worse. So the fact remains, this $800 to $900 million is an estimate. And one of the interesting questions, of course, will be, where will that money come from?
Bob, what does escalation mean in that graph?
What it means is that they've taken the improvements and they've divided them up into phases, and then they have taken the cost now, and then they have quote unquote escalated it, actually by 5%. So if you build, if something costs you $100 million today, then 10 years from now, it'll cost perhaps close to $200 million.
Okay, so it's in future dollars.
It's
That's the escalation.
It's a different way of saying it. It's in nominal dollars. Nominal dollars.
If only we could snap our fingers and do it now, we could bring that part of it.
Yes, yes. So at any rate, that's what I wanted to present. I've intentionally made this short because what I'd like to do, Don and I would both like to do, is listen. And so that's it. Oh, by the way, one small correction. This was written when I'd thought that we were going to do a closed session on this and on the lease, because again, we've got two parts. We got this plan for the future, but then we have a lease that expires on December 31st. And so, but the plan would be that we would do this in open session.
Great, thank you. I'm going to start with one card, Diane Reckless.
Hi, I'm Diane. I used to be on the school board. I served on the first big Coverly committee a few years ago and was an active participant in the 4 co-design meetings.
Thank you.
And I want to say to you all, basically, do no harm. You have the opportunity. This is the last big space in town. And if you consume it in one area, you don't have it for another. And you can put housing in a lot of different places in a lot of small chunks. You can't put a high school in a lot of small chunks around town. So please be real careful on that. The Palo Alto area has to add additional housing units, there's no question. But every 1,000 housing units or every 1,000 housing units is going to generate students. At some point, you're going to need another school. I don't know when, nobody knows when, but please save it. In my mind, it would be fine to make the 525 portion much more dense than is currently on the maps. It's got a huge park called Cubberley right behind it. It can be a pretty dense situation. But please, please save the center core of Cubberley that was set aside as public lands. Save it as public lands. It's a real slippery slope, and it's the only big space. So on the other thing, on your list of future board meetings, I didn't find Cubberley anywhere on there for the whole year. And it strikes me that you might want to put it somewhere. Thank you.
Will no doubt be added. I think we're not sure of the timeline yet, but thank you. Okay, board members. I won't start with Todd again because I did that every time. So we'll go around. But I think, Dr. Austin, tell me if you disagree here. One of the, we also haven't really framed up the issue with the lease, right? The lease is up this year, but you might want to explain a little background as to what we're talking about with that. But when it comes to the Cubberley property itself, I think one of the things we've heard from the city is they are itching to go. They are ready to go ahead with next plans. I think we'd all agree that we're not ready to build and we don't have any need for another school now, but we likely will one day. So timeline is one of the things that we're, and what that relationship might look like if we're on different timelines, right?
I just had a few things. And we can check some assumptions here too. I think that the city and the school district have very different senses of urgency right now. So if that's inaccurate, I'm going to want to hear that for sure. Housing. I think the board has given enough hints that housing is important. First, by doing the survey that we did with staff. Next, by putting it as part of our resolution of 3 things. My inclination is that we are really starting to push towards 525 San Antonio as a future study. I'm not saying to make a decision, but I'd like to know from the board's perspective, is the main Cubberley section on the table or not? I don't expect it to be, but if I'm wrong on that, I'd like to hear about that. The lease agreement is up in December. I have been working staff to staff trying to get an extension. Quite honestly, I did not expect it to be such a challenge. At one point we had discussed 2-year extension, which would allow us time to work through some of the other things that are more closely tied to development. Then that was reduced to a 1-year. Then it was reduced to 6 months, and most recently it was taken off the table staff to staff, and that is, I don't know how much of that is direction of city council because their meetings are closed session on this topic. But currently, I've been unable to secure an extension proposal for you. So I'd like to know your thoughts about the extension proposals, or if you even want me to pursue them. So those are the big things I have right now, and I'm sure this conversation will lead us into some more.
Okay. Why don't we start with Ms. Baton-Caswell? There's a couple of different things there.
Yeah, why don't I start with what Don asked about, and then I have a couple more questions. I mean, I'm a very big proponent of putting housing at 525, but I'm actually a very big naysayer about putting housing on the Cubberley section. one of the things that's puzzling to me is why the number was capped at 64 at 525. I assume that has something to do with current zoning, but it seems to me that why wouldn't we, what's the most you can put there? And then we could talk about how we talk to the city about zoning. Yeah, take that first.
Very quick, and again, this is staff to staff, so don't quote me on this beyond the fact that these are conversations. 4.5 stories, so that half comes for underground parking.
So 4 stories of housing.
4 stories of housing, and depending on the footprint that's allowed, that'll determine how many units that is. But as far as density, and that would require rezoning for us. We're not zoned to do that currently. But that would seem to be in line with other projects in the area.
So 64 units is with rezoning? Or we could have it more dense if 4 stories could be more dense than 64 units?
That's right.
That's my understanding.
What, do we have any sense of what the maximum density, let's assume that we could get any zoning we wanted. What could you actually do with 4 stories?
I don't know if we know that.
Yeah, we're not sure on the setbacks because I haven't asked them to start doing that work, but a similar project that's being proposed another place was the better part of 100 units.
Okay, all right, so that's more.
Yeah.
And I agree with Diane. I mean, that area could be more densely built. I mean, it's sort of industrial over there, and it's on a major artery. What happens if we don't have a lease extension? Do we kick everybody out of Cubberley? What?
But the 8 acres aren't ours.
No, I'm not talking about the 8 acres. I'm talking about the part that the city's leasing right now. What happens then?
I may have Bob respond to that because it's a pretty big question. Get that right, Bob?
Yeah, well, in an ordinary lease situation, the city would be a holdover tenant.
So we'd be out of a lease, but they'd still be here.
In other words, they're a holdover tenant and they make payments.
So, but just to clarify, are there any, I mean, the part of Cubberley we're talking about, are there any tenants? Because I think it's the gym, the theater, the fields. I don't think there are.
Are there any tenants in the space? We get money for the fields, right?
Right, but they're not,
It uses all of it, the gym.
but it's not like we kick them out. People just reserve fields and then they use them.
We literally, I mean, our students use the property, but the property is fully leased to the city. So, in the sense that if revenue from the gyms or revenue from the dance floor or revenue from the theater, that's their revenue.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to be really understand this. If tomorrow there was no more lease, Stanford Soccer Club, do they pay some, or whoever it is who's using the gyms and the fields, do they pay us directly, or do we expect
No,
this?
we have no relationship to Stanford Soccer Club.
Okay, and I'm making up Stanford Soccer Club. I have no idea
Right,
if they're
but I
using
mean,
it.
Whoever's using the gyms, we have no relationship.
So
with
what would happen if tomorrow this was broken?
We don't know that answer.
I think we need to understand that answer.
Right.
Because it has something to, I would imagine the city can't just kick out people who have been forever using space over there, or long-term users of space.
I don't imagine it would be well received, but
I'm sure they could do it, but I don't think it would be feasible for them to do it.
Right. I'm very careful not to give you legal advice.
Oh, I'm not asking for legal advice. I'm just asking what would happen.
Right.
Okay. Does the terms of our lease, let's say we didn't continue the lease and the city canceled all the relationships that they had for the people that we're leasing today. Who are we allowed to lease to?
Well, it's a public facility. we'd be allowed to lease to whoever, to 501c3s and the like.
So it's defined as we would be allowed to lease to 501c3s, government agencies, or not?
Well, again, you really need an attorney to advise you on that.
Okay, well, I think we sort of, I mean, unless we have an extension in our lease, we do need to understand.
Right. No, and I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, so that would be Dr., Don.
Yeah.
Dr. Don.
So let me just touch that briefly. I've just started having some of those conversations with Ed Shikata, and I had not gone to looking to those questions. They're all the right questions, because until about a week ago, I was pretty confident we were going to have an extension. But now that's apparently less, I have less confidence about that. So now I'm going to go ask these questions.
Okay, I mean, I guess in sort of the world I thought we were in, we did phase 1 with the city, and we had a lease time period where we did it. And then I would think in a different world, I guess, that we would have some goal for the next period of time, and we would have a lease over that period of time, and then we'd have a goal to get something done during that time. I don't even know how we're, I think I answered the questions you asked. I'm not sure what else you want from us. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I've got one, I'm wondering if there's one more thing that you and Ed are working through a bit, but it's really that timeline of, we know we don't need a new school now. We know that there's a demand for staff housing. We know that we could really use a new district office. I don't know that any of us will have an answer right now, but thinking about, are we, if we're not on the same timeline as the city, are we interested in dividing up that land? Are we interested in trying to make a timeline with them so that they get started and we follow in chunks, or, that sort of thing, I think, is one of the things we're also wondering, right?
So sequencing matters.
Thank you. Sequencing.
And I can tell you, because it was my proposal, so this is nothing confidential about it here. My proposal was to settle this lease first, get that squared away, and so it's not a distraction, an extension of some sort. Number 2, to have a board discussion about housing at 525, and I think we've got that scheduled in the early fall, so we can have that more meaningful conversation, district office down the line, although that's something that we've clearly said that we're interested in at least exploring. And during the time from the extension of the lease forward, my suggestion to the city was to, explore something like an ad hoc committee between the two agencies so that we truly are making progress towards those things that they have an interest in also, which is the development of the Cubberley property. But at this point, to hold up the lease seems unnecessary, especially given that we have not had any real discussions of substance when it comes to funding or timing or priorities or sequencing with the city.
Okay, Melissa, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have my sort of other thing is the theater, the gyms. These are buildings that I think we both have an interest in, and we have an interest in short-term as well as long-term. It's not like the school interest, which is out a ways. Do you think the city is just not interested in those facilities? Because then it's just up to us how we deal with them.
I think they're interested in those facilities. They use them a lot.
Yeah, we haven't gone there, but I think everyone agrees that the city has an interest in those facilities. They're still functional and great. And I also think short-term, there'd be no reason to think about knocking those down to rebuild a similar facility. So as we talk about the 8-acre piece, an option, a thought is to allow the city to progress at their own pace on the 8 acres, while at the same time continuing to use the gym, the theater, the fields, with really no change, so that the person on the street would not notice much of a difference at all.
But that would assume we have a lease with them.
Yes.
Chicken and egg thing here.
It is. I don't have anything else. I want to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Okay, Shaunak?
Yeah, first, we definitely have an interest, I think, in any construction that the city wants to move forward with now, which is to say, I don't think we can split up the city's portion and our portion and say, okay, city, do what you're going to do, and we'll take our time with it, only because if we've established already 3 uses, right? A future space for school, housing, and the district office. I mean, even the school, if we sort of discount or ignore anything that's going to happen in terms of developing adjacent or integrated green space or community resources when we're planning for a school, then I think we're missing out on possibilities. Even if that school is 10 years down the line, it means that, you know, we should be at least thinking about those things now while those other portions are being developed. You know, I think I agree with Melissa. Maybe if Melissa said this, I think phasing or sequencing is appropriate. I think we've talked about the district office moving there. I think that is a more short-term need than a school, which isn't going to happen for at least 10 years. But it doesn't mean that we should wait on everything, because we do have concerns that are coming up. And so my thought is that we should really move forward with the city on this. We should be partners, as was envisioned in, I guess, 5 years ago when the Cubberley report came out. The exact quote from the report says, if the city and the school district work cooperatively together with the common goal of a shared use that will serve both educational and community services of future generations of Palo Altans, then that goal will be achieved for the betterment of all community members. And so that is, I think, the goal. It's been set. I still stand by that goal. And I think it's time for us to take a few next steps now that Concordia is done and a tremendous amount of work has been done by the community, by staff here, by everybody in the district and the city, looking at those secondary questions, you know, how much space we'll need for a future school, or how much space we would like to reserve for a future school. What is the need for housing? How much? Where would it be? What are the logistics behind it? I agree with Melissa that 525 San Antonio seems like a very appropriate spot for housing. I think I've said on the record before in the paper that, you know, I support building teacher housing at Cubberley. And I was referring to the Cubberley site, including 525 with it, because I think as we've been discussing the Cubberley site, we've included 525 as a part of the parcel. I agree that that's a fine space to put teacher housing. What would the district office look like at Cubberley? What are the benefits? What are some of the negatives? What is the vision for a district office at Cubberley, and how is that different than the district office is now? You know, start gathering some data, start having some discussions about those things. But again, we have to do it as partners. And there's been a really sort of disturbing 2 different dialogues going on in the community. And I think in part it's because of the urgency that the city feels. But, you know, there have been a lot of missed communications and misinformation in the community as a result of discussions that have been going ahead on the city side, and sort of we, or at least I, have faced a lot of community questions and concerns by statements made at city council meetings. So it's really important, I think, for everyone to actually have clear communication. I think we should have a joint study session with the city. I think we should do it on a Saturday when people are here, when community members who work and you know, can't make it to weekday things can attend. It's a very big and important issue. We should have it at Cubberley. We shouldn't have it here. We shouldn't have it at the city council chambers. I see some frustrated looks because I know tech is going to be difficult to set up there, but you know, I think that's important to show that this should be a partnership, but it isn't something that's being driven by the city, and it's not something that's been driven by us. It is a partnership, and it's one that was envisioned, you know, over 5 years ago, most recently. Again, another prescient quote from that Cubberley report: the last time Cubberley's future was at risk, the city and school district forged a visionary partnership to serve the Palo Alto community by protecting the site, and putting it to valued use that has endured for 20 years. Today's circumstances are putting that partnership to the test. Decisions to not renew the lease, those are very concerning to me. Or at least, failure to continue the discussions on the negotiation of the lease. Because it shows me two things. Either, one, the city is willing to give up its interest in Cubberley, which, if it sees fit to terminate its lease, it sees fit to give up its interest in Cubberley, and that seems unfair to the community, who spend a great deal of time and a great deal of investment in that space, a great deal of time. I know Ben also was on those Cubberley committees, going and doing the work with Concordia, making sure that there was a real joint vision. Or the second option is that the city is using the lease agreement to exercise some leverage over us to take a position. And that's not how partners act. So I think we need to come together. We need to have a joint session. We need to really get on the same page here, because I'm getting a lot of community concerns based on discussions that are being had, simply because we're not in sync on this. And I think we need to be.
Thank you, Shaunak. Ken?
Well, I share Shaunak's, concern about the process. It does seem clear that the city council in its closed session decided to tie the lease renewal to some kind of development agreement between the district and the city. I wouldn't have wanted to do that in public either. I think that's a pretty unwise course to take. And I hope that the city council, has the courage of its convictions and holds those future discussions in public. I think the citizens of Palo Alto will be much better served by seeing their elected representatives discussing their interests in public rather than behind closed doors. I think that to sort of want to hold these public uses and the benefits to Palo Alto citizens kind of hostage in leverage in negotiations between the city and the school district just makes no sense. So I hope that they reconsider that course. I think that the course that that Dr. Austin laid out of extending the lease, we've made a lot of progress. I think in the joint process that we're in, extending the lease to allow this process of discussion to go forward makes a lot of sense. But I also think that to Bob's point, that the district is a landlord, has a tenant who has expressed some interest in not continuing their lease, so we should look at other tenants for those facilities. That just seems like the obvious next step for us to do. So I hope that staff will begin to explore those options. I certainly don't think that we should be more committed to those public uses than the city is, given that those uses are the ones that the city is responsible for providing. So that's my sense about that. And I would much prefer not to, until there's progress, and I think a more rational approach from the city council, I would certainly not want to sit down with the city council in a joint session that doesn't have an agreement, in prospect. I don't see the benefit of that. I'd like to see staff work to try to get us into a better place. I like hearing about these things more than living it in real time. So I'd prefer to have that to continue that. I think that one of the things that I think is important to for everybody to realize is that while the district and the city have some overlapping interests, we also have some different interests and some different responsibilities. And so I don't think, and I've heard from city council members who I don't think quite grasp this. It's really important that we understand that the resources that we're entrusted with in the form of bond revenues and operating expenses and so forth are really intended for pursuing the educational mission of the district. They're not, and to the extent that we can see shared interests, for example, at some point in the future, having joint use of facilities and so forth, I think that makes sense. But we can't be in a position, for example, of using our bonding authority to build facilities that at some point in the future might be used for a school in order to provide community facilities for Palo Alto. That's not what that bonding authority is for. And I don't want to put our ability to go to the community in the future sort of with clean hands and ask for, authority to issue bonds. I don't want to put that at risk by trying to get into sort of complicated financial arrangements with the city. I think that the great achievement of the work that has been done so far is that we have clarified through the Concordia process or down the roads towards clarifying enough of a master plan so that the city can go ahead and decide how to proceed with its desire to build a community center, to improve the Carberry facilities that it has an interest in. I think we should be willing to do things like reconfigure the 8 acres that the city owns, expand that 8 acres if needed by doing a land swap for other, land in Palo Alto, if that would be helpful. There's a lot of things that we can do to be good neighbors with the city at Carberry. But I think the idea that somehow we're going to be fully joint development partners with facilities that are going to be built, that don't have an educational purpose, I just don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's really important that it be clear to the city that that's not going to happen. And maybe if it's clear to them, then they'll feel enabled to move on with the, with what we can do. In terms of the housing, yeah, I mean, I agree that 525 San Antonio is an appropriate place for housing, and I don't think that, I think there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't want to do housing on the land at Carberry proper. So I support that. Is there anything I've missed, Don, in that?
No, I think that sums it up, and I think, I'm not sure how we get to it. I know Todd is not gone yet. Or Jennifer. Sorry, Jennifer.
Or Ben.
Boy, okay, half of you have not gone yet. Fine. If we are going forward with a joint session at some point, I would like maybe just some quick thoughts when we go around. Maybe the people that haven't gone yet can tag on what we would like to get as an outcome of that joint session, so we will know how to frame that up. So beyond, and I've heard Shaunak say, a time and location that can bring people in, I'd also like to know what problems we would want to solve at that joint session, because it's going to be challenging with 10 people. So as we go around, if you just help me there, that would be.
Yeah, because if I can just comment on that very briefly, I just think we need to be a lot closer together in terms of, I don't think at a joint session of the city council and school board, we're likely to solve a lot of problems. I think that we may be able to sort of ratify agreements that have been reached at the staff level. If we're going into an open-ended, process, I don't think we're going to come out with a whole bunch of
We've
solutions.
had 2 of these already, and they were not, we didn't get anything out of them.
Well, and this is one of the reasons we're talking about this today, because it doesn't, the city side is hopeful. I think that will move us ahead, and I think that many of us are thinking, what are we going to get out of that 12 people together and an unclear focus? So that's part of what this conversation is today. What would we hope to get out of it if we did it? Todd?
Thank you. So I wrote down 5 things, but we probably cut it to 4. So the lease, the development partnership, housing, the district office, and Shawnick raised it, and then outcome of potential joint meetings. So let me just run through them, try to hit them quickly. So the lease, as Ken, I think everything, Ken captured my thoughts pretty well. First and foremost, we're a landlord that has a income-producing property that produces $5 million, which is 2% of our total budget a year. If that lease does not renew, that impacts us in the current fiscal year by about $2.5 million. So it essentially blows a $2.5 million hole in our budget. I know that, I hope that's appropriately gasp-worthy for everybody, because that's a lot. We don't have a way to replace that revenue unless we release the property. So if we think there is even a small possibility that the lease will not renew, and that the city will, or not be extended, then we have to start looking for other tenants right away. I don't see any, good options make good choices. If we have our back against the wall, we're likely not to make a good choice. So the way to do that is to generate options. And, we hire a property, the options aren't hard to generate. We hire a property agent and we say, please list the property and help find us tenants. I guess we have to figure out what kind of tenants we could serve. I didn't realize, and I don't know if it's correct that we can't rent to commercial tenants. That would be worth knowing, because I'm sure there are a lot of commercial tenants who wouldn't mind moving into that space. It's a great space. But we should find out what our options are and then make sure we make them live, because otherwise it's very hard to negotiate in a situation where you don't have any options. And where if we have a $2.5 million shortage in the middle of the year, that's a very, very big deal. So I think that's got to be front and center in our mind. I hope and I expect that the city isn't intending not to renew. It doesn't make, to Melissa's point, it's like hard to compute. I was on the board of the softball league. It's like, sorry kids, no more softball. And the idea that the district is gonna take on the responsibility to do that, it's like, you got time for that? You got time for that? So we don't know how to do that. So the only sensible outcome that I can see is that we resolve our differences and that we lease it out. If they think the price is too high, then let's assess the value of the property. To Ken's point, it seems like a valuable property, or it's a valuable property, but I don't know what the appropriate lease value. If they think $5 million is wrong and it should be 3, then let's get somebody to assess that and figure out how to negotiate how to get from 5 to 3. I'm not looking for a gift or any kind of concession from them. First and foremost for us, it's a property that we're a landlord, and it's a property we need to get revenue from in order to do what we've committed to do. So, let's negotiate with them like any landlord negotiates with any tenant and try to reach reasonable commercial terms. And I hope we do it in public. I think this idea of do it in closed session and then them sending a staff member. I asked at the city school meeting yesterday if anybody in the room, the council members or the staff members, could tell us whether the city had a sincere interest in renewing the lease, because that we were meeting to talk about it the next day, and none of them could answer. That was concerning to me. It's like, what, okay. I got 2 city council members and 3 senior staff members, and no one could give an answer. It's like, okay, then I guess I know where I stand, and I went home and wrote the Craigslist listing for Carver Lake, 25 prime acres available for lease. So that I think we'll work it out, but we need to have an option, and we need the city to kind of step up and kind of realize the situation they're putting us in, and if they feel like they want to do it, let us know that, and then we can negotiate it in a reasonable way, the way we have in the past. On the development, this is just a separate topic, and I think there have been a lot of different views of this, and over time, and I talked to a couple people who've been involved in this for much longer than I have, and they had interesting perspectives about how this has been discussed before. I think, as Ken said, the headline of the Concordia process is great news. The city, the schools, which used to feel that none of that 35 acres could be touched because we were going to need it back we needed it all back in order to build a secondary school, and we might need it sooner rather than later. As a result of this process and the clarifying effect on our thinking, I think we've learned two things. One is we don't need all 35 acres. We probably need 25 acres. 25 acres is a very common size for a secondary school. How many, you have many, you've been at a lot of secondary schools, 25 acres seem right to you?
Say 40's on the high end, 25 is right in the ballpark, pretty typical.
Okay, so good news, while our other schools are bigger, we can do an equally good school on 25 acres, which is, and that's a sea change for us. And the other good news is, looking at the enrollment history, recent and what we think is going to happen going forward, there's no way we're going to need that for at least 10 years. And I would say it wouldn't shock me at all if it were 20. So great news. We can now decouple the future of the 8 acres from the future of the other 25. And we always held you back. We were the anchor around you guys wanting to do whatever you wanted to do over there. We're not going to be the anchor anymore. We're happy to see you develop and prosper, and we'll continue. We want to continue to lease these other things to you because there's a great community benefit and we like the revenue. So, there's a good path for us to go forward. I think that's a headline. I think some people have, and people who I think care a lot about this process, have developed the view that, oh no, we should really be working together, and there's this big missed opportunity. And if we develop, if we don't develop the school facilities at the same time, or at least some of them, then I just think that there may be some missed opportunity, but I think we're going to miss it. Because when your needs are 20 years in the future and you have no idea what they are, I don't see any way that we could sensibly build buildings, issue bonds, plan facilities. I mean, I just don't see a scenario in which that happens. It's very common for school districts to lease facilities or make them available to city partners or community partners when they already have them for schools. But I think it would be unprecedented for a school district to build or fund or takes part in building facilities for schools that may be built sometime in the future. I think that would be, I'd feel like I was way out of my lane. And I don't see how we can do it with bond funds. I don't see how we can do it with operating funds. I've heard ideas about, oh, why don't you guys lease facilities and that'll make it so the district, so the city has more financial capacity to, it's like out of our operating fund, like lease facilities. We don't need a gym and a theater. We got gym and theaters at our schools. We don't need another one. You guys, the city may need one and that's great, and we can continue to lease you the 2 that we own. But the idea that we'd build a new one just because, I think we got to move off of that because from where I sit, it seems like way out of our perspective scope. So I think we can be great neighbors. I think Ken laid out all the, we can swap land, we can move boundaries, we can continue to lease things. There's a parking lot, there's all this other stuff that you kind of need to make your stuff work. We can be great partners on all of that. But I don't think what we can be partners with is financing and paying for new facilities that we don't know if and when we're ever going to need. We got to put that aside, I think. That's my view. In terms of housing, I'm a big fan of teacher housing if you have the need. What I haven't seen in our case is whether we have the need or not. I saw an employee survey that said that some number of employees would like it. The challenge is, I'm sure if you asked anybody, would you like cheaper housing close to work? If you ask any group of employees that, they would almost certainly say for sure. So the question is, what problem is it really solving for us? I originally thought it was a retention and recruiting problem, you know, and now I'm finding, gosh, you know, how many applicants did we have for every open position this year? A lot? A lot, especially for multiple subjects, yeah. Yeah, we had, so it's not like people, and are they good? I mean,
I think we've had an excellent quality of candidates, great applicant pools and strong hires, yeah.
so it sounds like housing isn't necessary to richen up the applicant pool. And in terms of retention, while it would always be great to retain people, I don't think our retention is out of line with what it's been historically or what you experience in other districts. Is that your experience?
Yeah, it feels consistent with what I've experienced in the last 9 years in HR.
Okay, so, you know, so if it's not recruiting and it's not retention, then what problem is it that we're solving? And I don't know, I mean, there might be other problems that I mean, it's nice to have teachers local because then they hang around at school and they come to events. It's nice to have teachers in the community. I can see other cases for it, but until we study it and really articulate that and kind of put the number, is that worth $10 million? Is it worth $50 million? What is it worth? And what else could we do if we didn't do this to solve that problem? Then it's hard to make a big investment and commit a piece of land that we originally bought because we thought it could be an elementary school site, by the way. I mean, it's hard to say we're going to do something that's going to last 50 years when we aren't sure of what problem it is we're trying to solve. So I'm at this point neither for nor against. I'm wildly in favor of studying it because I think it's a lot of people are doing it, and there's always the case, hey, what if everybody else does it and we don't? Then maybe that's a disadvantage. Maybe that's a problem. So there's, you know, I can see lots of cases that we might decide to do it, but not without appropriate study. So that's what I'm really looking forward to, is appropriate study. In terms of the district office, until we figure out what a great use for this building is, I'll be reluctant to look at moving the district office. I mean, there's been talk about what we can do with this facility, but I'd really like to see a concrete, this is the great idea that's going to make it so reluctantly staff has to leave the 25 Churchill and go to some brand spanking new facility somewhere else. But so I just want to make sure we get that right until we, and then in terms of a joint session, I think what Ken said reflects my view. It's like, staff should negotiate, just like, you know, negotiating a treaty, any intergovernmental negotiation, staff should lay all the groundwork so that we can show up and ultimately take the credit for all of staff's great work. Just like we always do. Well, the last thing in the world I want to do is get together with our city council and just bicker at each other. I mean, I don't think there's any benefit. We can do that. We don't need a Brown Act meeting to do that. But I would love to see it. So I think that we need to get much closer to understanding what it is we're trying to actually agree on before we try to get those two bodies together. Did that cover everything?
Ben.
I wanted to start off by saying thank you to Ms. Ofek for introducing me to this whole Coverly program. She got me set up with Concordia. I learned a lot, and without that, I would have no idea what we were talking about. So, you know, moving forward, I'm really excited to see what we're going to do with it. I know growing up, I spent a lot of time on the Coverly site, and since then, I've run out of uses for it, but I know that there's the possibility still for some. In terms of the teacher housing, I think that I'm closest with the teachers from Palo Alto and who live in the surrounding areas, the ones that I say hi to at the football games and sit next to at the concerts, and, you know, who come and speak to the site councils. I think that it boosts community morale and introduces wonderful connections for both teachers, students, and parents. In terms of the lease and joint study session, I have no comment.
Okay. Thanks. When it comes to the lease, I'm not going to They had a closed session meeting. We don't know what happened in the closed session meeting. I'm not going to pretend to know what their thinking was or whatnot. I'm not surprised that they didn't make a comment at the city school liaison meeting because they had come from a closed session and they are precluded from discussing closed session things outside of closed session. So why they agendized it as a closed session, I'm not sure, but that's where we are now. So I hope they extend the lease, but that's something they have to figure out in terms of their needs and the community's needs and their budget and whatnot. I am hopeful that they will extend it. I think there will be, Todd mentioned Palo Alto girls softball. I know some children in my own family that would be really upset if suddenly there were no fields for that. But I think that's something that they need to work out. And of course, if there's something that has to be renegotiated, we renegotiate it. For the property itself, when it comes to the housing, I think it's obvious that housing of all kinds is needed, staff housing, and I know the city has talked about wanting to put housing on their portion. I think we can only really speak to our portion, and I like the idea of putting the housing for ours at 525, where we identified it. Going with that 4.5 stories, I think sounds like it makes a lot of sense. And if we continue a partnership with the city, I don't know if that means that it will be a quantity of housing that the city would also like to take advantage of in some way. And I think those are the things we have to talk about. I don't think we have too much of a say in what they do with their acreage. But in our acreage, I think it makes sense to put it in that 525 area. Of course, before we actually got to building housing, we'd need to know exactly how much is needed. But Todd actually mentioned the two things that I have long thought were factors that mattered. If everyone else is doing it and we don't, then eventually we find ourselves saying, well, we don't have the same applicant pool we used to have, and we don't want to get to that point. And also staff's ability to stay local. I think, like you just said, right, you're closer to teachers that are local, and I think it changes the dynamic when teachers have to run out at 3:15 to beat the traffic back somewhere far away, or when, even if it's only 5 miles up the road in San Carlos, it takes 45 minutes if you leave at 5, so I'm gonna leave right away. And also the ability to come back at night. I mean, I've had jobs, and my husband has had jobs, that if you live near where you work, you can go back and forth and come see kids' activities and still go to an evening thing. And if you work far away, you can't do that. So it definitely changes the quality of, I don't know if commitment is the right word, but the availability, the ease with which staff can participate in outside of school hour stuff. So I think there's no doubt that there is a value add. I think that we probably need to know more to know what that value add is and what that financial commitment it's worth. We hired Concordia to help us map out a master plan of the entire campus, and they did some really good work. We paid a bunch of money. We had a lot of community input, and I think it's great on so many levels. It's based on a lot of input. It's got more green space. It's got more square footage. It's a beautiful design, and I am hopeful that no matter how it goes forward, we can still work very much within those parameters. If maybe they're developing their 8 acres first, we're still using that plan in a way that makes sense and that doesn't preclude us from one day when all is said and done, it's still one campus, right? Even if it gets developed in different phases. I share my colleagues' concern about how we pay for it. We don't need a school right now. There's an argument to be said that we could really use a new district office, one that maybe fits all of the central administration and has them seeing each other on a regular basis so they know what's going on in each of their departments. It's hard not to be siloed when you're physically siloed. So I think there's an argument to be made that there is a need right now in a lot of ways, but of course that comes with a cost. So a cost-benefit analysis makes sense there. But if we come to the conclusion that we would benefit from housing, and we do come to the conclusion that we would benefit from a district office, and the city is chomping at the bit to move ahead with theirs, then certainly there's a lot of development that makes sense on that property. It takes a while to do that much development, so I don't think we're looking at doing it all this year. But how you pay for it is a question that we really have to answer, I think in a different way than the city has to answer it. Our dollars are for students, and we don't need that building right now. I'd also have a concern about building a state-of-the-art building now, and in 20 years we go, gosh, I can't believe we put those walls there. We don't, best practices don't tell us that that's what we want to do now, and we have an outdated building from the minute we move into it. So it doesn't make sense to me to build any school building until we actually need it. But there are many other components of that campus that I think would benefit from work now. The question is, where does that money come from, right? Like you said, you don't take out a bond so that we can have nice new offices for ourselves, unless there's a real dire need for something like that. So I think that that's the next question for us to answer. But when it comes to timeline, my guess is there are several parts of that property that we have an interest in developing sooner rather than later, if we find a way to financially do it that makes sense and is responsible to our community, to our constituents. So I don't know if that answers some questions. Do others have any either responses to what other people said, or you went first?
I do.
It's
Well,
been a while.
and actually, Todd said a couple of things that I just wanted to sort of maybe a little expand on. If the lease value is wrong, then the way to figure out what the lease value is not to have them come and say, we only want to pay less than that. The way to do it is to go out and find out what the market rate is on the lease. I think we followed a process last time where they just told us what the lease value is, and we went forward with it. And I don't think we do that this time. I think that's not the right thing to do for that messes up our responsibilities, our fiduciary responsibility if we do it that way. I think it's very likely higher. So that's the one thing, Dawn, that I think is really critical. The district office isn't serving our needs right now.
No.
And if we really want the district office staff to provide the best leverage and support, then we really do need to have the ability to have everyone in the same place when we need it. We need to be able to do training when we need it. We need people to all be able to park here. Which brings me to another thing is I think the one thing that we might have a need for earlier rather than later, and certainly the city would, is a parking plan for that whole site. Now, we could say, you go deal with your parking on your 8 acres and we'll deal with our parking on our 25 acres.
Seems like a bad idea.
It seems like a bad idea, but we could do it that way. And then I do want to reinforce what Jennifer said. If we don't have teacher housing and every district around us has it, we will be at a disadvantage. But more so, we should be looking at this as, what are the advantages we could get if our teachers did live here? And I think one of them is commitment to our district in a longer term. So it's not just being here at night and on weekends for games and stuff, but teachers who see their whole career as being here. And, maybe we don't want every single person to have their whole career here, but we would like, one thing I love about this, I met with someone yesterday who just moved to the area, and she's like, it's like a small town here. Everyone knows each other. Everyone went to the schools, and they're working at the schools, and their kids are at the schools. I love that about our community, and I'd hate to see that change.
Okay.
Can I get one clarification?
You may.
Very, very helpful for me, by the way, thank you. I just want to check for understanding here.
Of course, we're not on the same page as usual.
We're not, yeah.
You're all within 2 pages, so it's okay.
Continuum.
When it comes to the joint committee or the joint session, we had something tentative staff to staff on the calendar for October 28th. Am I hearing that you would rather not have an arbitrary date and instead wait until we've made enough progress to justify a joint session?
Well,
Am I hearing that correctly?
In my mind, if we've got a date on the calendar that seems to work for people, I think you save it. But as time goes on, if we don't gain clarity as to the purpose of that meeting and the desired outcomes, there's no reason to have it.
Melissa didn't get a chance to weigh in on the joint session.
Sure.
Okay, we've had 2 joint sessions that have not been helpful. My feeling is there's no point in having a 3rd joint session unless we have something that we can decide upon, and we have some sort of, and I think facilitated is the right word, some sort of facilitated way to have a joint meeting that ends up with an outcome. Otherwise, it's just everybody talking.
Pontificating.
I mean, I'm not encouraged by what I've seen to this point, as reflected in, what apparently happened in the closed session, which I think we have some pretty good idea what happened in that closed session. So I'm not encouraged, but, people change, they get, more, maybe some folks on the city council will listen to what we said and rethink where they are, and we'll get back on track. So, but at this point, I wouldn't go forward with a joint session, tomorrow based on where we are today.
Okay. Are we putting Coverly to bed?
I think so.
Okay.
Can I make an agenda suggestion?
Yes.
I suggest that we remove item D in the interest of time. Because I think it will be as timely, whatever the next time is, than it is.
That we have, right, you've got it in the hopper, and that makes sense to me. I think the other 2 are relatively quick, but we're not going to have any substantive time to get into what you're proposing. So all those in favor of postponing D for a future date? Actually, I didn't have a second. Can I second that myself?
Second.
Okay. Is it all those in favor? Aye. Great. Oh, I didn't do a preferential vote. Okay, so looking at item 4C, it's the calendar. And you will notice that those of you who have served on the board for longer than, well, that's really only you 2. I think when Todd and I first joined the board, there was the last vestiges of a board calendar that sort of laid out over the course of the year when we'd see certain things. But one of the things that I've noticed in here is that there's some real detailed, we've taught these reports, these metrics, whatnot, and it looks very different to me. So I'm happy to see it back, but perhaps you could talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, I can go quickly. And this one's, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to work through this right now, but I do want to give the overview.
I don't think you have to go meeting by meeting.
Good.
Just give us the overview, and
I'm good with
hopefully
that.
we all glanced.
All right, couple things. Last year, as a new team, both me working with the board and with our own staff, we were lucky if we were thinking 2 meetings ahead. And that's not good as far as preparation for the meetings. It's not good as far as foreshadowing to the community. It's not great as far as trying to line up some meetings that may have a theme, where a theme can be had. So we're really excited this year to bring back some suggested holding spots for board items. We really tried to pace them. As I said earlier, everything that was in the first part of our meeting today is reflected in the board agenda. We have the deliverables page, which is another attachment that you have, but really they kind of go together. We have standing items that we have already pre-identified. I think some really good work last year as far as making sure that we had certain items that just always come in front of us. And then Vicki went through and looked at where things historically have fallen, and we have those penciled in, so we don't have hopefully things won't slip through the cracks. We were pretty good about that last year, but now it's more just automatic. So that was the thought behind it. You've all had a chance, I'm guessing, to have looked through it. We'd be looking just for a list of anything that you think may be omitted that ties to one of our goals. We could make a list on that. This does not eliminate the role of agenda setting. That's a totally different function, but this is an opportunity for everyone to weigh in. I tried to take feedback from last year about things that board members had said that they wanted to see. So it's our best effort, and I can tell you infinitely better than last year's. Just trying to stay ahead of the students when you're a teacher, right?
Yep.
So that's it.
Okay, I don't, Shaunak, want to start?
Sure. Several meetings ago, I suggested that we post the agenda 10 days in advance, and you should have seen the looks I got. I think the idea of having this in advance, at least with the broad topics that we're going to be covering at the meetings over the course of the school year, is great. We've talked a little bit about the potential of posting this online. It's something I'd really like to see. If we have the academic year's meetings, broad strokes of the agendas posted online, that would go a huge way, I think, to really highlighting for the community what is going to be discussed when. And I would just ask that it be somewhat of an organic calendar so that we could, add as agenda setting decides to maybe kick something down the line 3 or 4 meetings. We can continue to populate it and change it so that community members can access it well ahead of schedule and it can be fairly accurate. I understand it's tied to goals right now, and so it's not necessarily tied to events like when we're going to discuss certain aspects of Coverly, as someone brought up. And again, updating those as well organically as they come up would really be helpful. But I really am glad about this. I think that one of the biggest things I've heard from community members is that agendas get posted 72 hours as required by the Brown Act, but they don't have enough time to really get a sense of what's going on, even though, Dr. Austin does a really great job of foreshadowing things in the weekly update. The more, the better. And this, I think, is a really, really great way to provide more transparency to the community and frankly, to the board members who, 72 hours is a lot, but sometimes it can be a struggle for a new board member to really catch up on the history of complex issues, and to be able to see where we're going to talk about things is very, very helpful. And yeah, it's a great thing. Thank you.
Ken?
Well, Don was very generous not to mention the upgrade in the agenda setting committee as one of the things that has changed positively. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Dauber.
Thank you for that.
That was me. That was me.
Wait, what was the upgrade? I missed that.
Kid was our first president. That is not what I said.
I think it's great to have this laid out in advance. I would like to see more built-in topics around our metrics on our equity goals periodically through the year. Maybe there's another calendar that I'm missing that has the reports calendar.
It looks like this.
Okay. Okay.
It's in your.
Okay, I missed this one.
The important part, and these are companion documents.
Okay, I'm probably just not looking at everything that I need to be, but assuming that I'm just missing something. Oh yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I just missed this. So that's great. You indicated that this was a real goal for this year, was to get more rational about this and to have a reporting schedule, and this looks great. Thank you.
Todd?
Yeah, this is good. My main goal is to make sure we get regular reports on the key initiatives, because I find that as useful and in some ways more useful than the big annual reports that we get, because that's the work you're actually, I mean, it's nice to get our report card from last year on whatever, and we obviously need to discuss that, but more actionable is getting real-time updates on, or near real-time updates on things you guys are actually working with that help us understand what's working, what's not working, what we should expect, that you guys are actually working on it and like on the ball, which I think helps us calibrate confidence and with confidence in management and ability to like give input at a time that it's meaningful. So it looks like those are in here, and I think it will probably take us some time to figure out how to do them right and get in a rhythm, because we're used to doing these high stake, oh my God, I've got the big board report, and it shouldn't be like that. Right. But the first thing is to put them on the calendar And we've done that, so good. Thank you.
Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, this is helpful. Actually, I think for me, it's easier to read than what we used to have, which was all jammed onto one page. And I don't know, it was so overwhelming for me to try to figure out what was when. So that's helpful. That said, it would be really helpful to me if these two things were merged together.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, it's like the HR system and the finance system.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. And there are a couple of things that I would love to see, and I kind of expect to see. We've changed TK to include ETK. I think there should be a report somewhere about that. Maybe it's combined with how we're doing with kindergarten.
Okay.
Another thing is our contracts with Cassie, and are we using someone else for elementary? I would expect to see a report on how we're doing. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that changed about 3 years ago. So I'd like to see a report on that. It would be awesome, Dawn, if in your weekly report after board meeting, you mentioned decisions that were made at the last board meeting.
Yeah, I've seen models for that.
Yeah, that would just be so helpful for the community. I get calls about it all the time. It would just be nice if it was consistently in there. And then I would love to get the legal expense report that I had asked for in June.
Yes,
And in May, and in April.
but you gave me the template.
I gave you a template now,
got it.
so I would love to get that. Thank you.
That's good.
Ben?
Looks wonderful. I'm excited to see what we have in store this year. Nobody likes surprises, so it's good to see that most of the stuff is already mapped out and gives me a good general sense of, what's going to happen so I can prepare myself. It's my first year, and I want to do the best I can to come in prepared. So this is a great tool for me, and I thank you guys.
Great.
I like surprises.
I wonder if, I don't know if anyone at Pally is really interested in this other than you, but if you're at like ASB meetings, you can always tell them this is what's coming down the pipe, right, before the agenda comes out. I don't know how interested they'll be, but I am very happy with this. I think it really helps us. Like Shaunak said, I think the community different people have different things they're really interested in, and if you really never know when it's going to be on the agenda until 72 hours before, sometimes it's hard to get babysitting, or maybe you're out of town or whatnot. So granted, it could change. It doesn't mean that everything's locked into these dates, but it just gives us an idea of about when to expect things. It probably won't surprise you to know I'm a particular fan of the local assessments being listed here as one of our great measures. It's the majority of how we evaluate our students' progress. So to focus on that, I think, is fantastic. And at least for the remaining time that I am sitting in the agenda setting committee, I think we'll try to not only set up the next agenda for almost 2 weeks out, but also take a look at the one after that, saying, do we still think we're on track for these things? So we can adjust accordingly, even a month out, which can be really helpful to the community. So I think these are great. There's so many equity, so many of these metrics that you talked about earlier in the afternoon, to see them here and mapped out along the year. I also know that we have a record of our meetings get longer come the end of the year because, we haven't talked about that. What about that? So to really try to get everything here on a pretty steady basis. Quite often we've had Melissa say, usually we talk about X, and most of us who haven't been on the board nearly as long say, what? So I think this could be really helpful for us. Anyone else? Great. Okay. As agreed, we are skipping 4D for now. We're just going to go to 4E, and this was our annual. As you know, at the beginning of the school year, we do assignments for school sites and programs. I did this based on feedback that was given to me when I asked anyone how much they cared about where they were. I looked at last year's assignments, tried to spread out secondaries and specialized and ones that require more time commitments or not. This is not set in stone. If anyone wants to request a change either now or later, we can just make sure that once we're sort of all in agreement, this will get posted online, and we'll make sure to share it with you all so you know what sites you might want to reach out to or make a connection with for the year ahead.
Can I just share one thing?
Yeah.
It's not a mistake that there's someone down for the Santa Clara County School Boards Association that's not me. I am the president for the year, and I do have to go to those meetings. But we could have somebody else come as well and vote on things.
Carpool.
It would be kind of cool.
Okay, any other red flags anyone sees, or did I really mess anything up?
So this will be on consent for next time, is that how
I
this works?
don't even know that we have to approve it, right? It's
I think
like-
we typically,
yeah, we have to, appro-
I think you're the boss on this one.
yeah, I mean,
oh
We
yeah.
usually just consent it.
okay, we'll consent it. All right, so expect for on the 27th, it'll be on consent.
Yeah,
unless-
if we try to go against her, it'll be like a
Yeah,
mutiny.
like really, you've got a problem? Like,
No, just,
what? Okay, so feel free to reach out to me or go directly to the person you want to trade with if you see a trade that you want. I think that is all we have. Anything else? Beyond, not adding anything that's not agendized, but,
I'm really excited for the school year.
all right.
Great. It's great to be back.
We like enthusiasm, that's good. Okay, great.
I just wanted to, on the Coverly thing, I just want to ask the superintendent to, I mean, this is obviously a live situation, but, I mean, I'm really struck at the short-term magnitude of it. I mean, sure, I want to work out the development partnership, but I'm really interested in whether we have a $2.5 million hole in our budget. So if you could keep the board informed on that, I think that would be great.
Pretty much in live time. Yep.
Great. Okay, meeting is adjourned, or retreat is adjourned.
Yeah.
Retreat is adjourned.
Friday at 5. Perfect.